Claudia was brought to the guillotine, the blade poised to fall and sever her head. Regis stood in the crowd, watching the execution with a sinister look, Nila standing behind him. The sharp blade fell, instantly severing Claudia's head. The girl couldn't tear her eyes away from the scene unfolding before her. This was also the last time she would see the enemies who had driven her to her death. The game was over. Putting down her phone, the girl stretched, finally having completed all the endings. She had just finished playing Nila's game, where the player takes on the role of the protagonist, Nila. She had never invested so much effort into a game before, having experienced all 200 possible endings. If it weren't for Nila's character, she would have given up at the beginning. After all, the protagonist was practically her ideal self. Seeing Nila never give up in the face of all difficulties, the girl also wanted to live the same way. The story began with Nila being adopted by a duke after a noble family went bankrupt. The emperor promised the duke that if he had a suitable daughter, he would let her marry the crown prince. Since the emperor was a man of his word, the duke had to bring a daughter, no matter the cost. He already had a daughter, Claudia, but she was frail and unfit for marriage. So he brought Nila, claiming she was now part of the family. Although she was just a substitute, the girl was satisfied with her role as she and the prince fell in love as if it were destined. But a few years later, Claudia, who was supposed to be dead, recovered. Perhaps because it was difficult for her, the girl's personality became terrible. The abuse towards Nila grew increasingly cruel, and eventually, Claudia replaced her and married the prince herself. In an instant, the girl's dreams, future, and even her lover were taken away. But she endured it all with resilience. Nila wasn't discouraged, as there were many other things to do in the world besides becoming queen. The girl played the game with all her might, discovering all the possible endings, even the one where the protagonist became a teacher. She had achieved 199 endings, all except the one where Nila became queen. After going through so much, she couldn't give up. The girl wanted to fulfill the protagonist's true dream, so she studied all the important nodes in the game, and finally, she successfully passed the 200th ending. Making Nila the queen was indeed very difficult, and when she finished the game, her eyes were filled with tears. However, there was still a strange feeling in the girl's heart. She remembered Claudia crying on the guillotine, constantly begging Nila for forgiveness. Every playthrough ended with Claudia's death. Even though she was the villain, sometimes the girl felt sorry for her, especially the last time, when Claudia was killed by her fiancé. Suddenly, the girl's phone received a notification about a 201st ending. Rubbing her eyes, she could hardly believe she had unlocked a bonus ending, one that could only be unlocked by someone who had completed all the game actions. And this time, the character she played wasn't Nila herself, but Claudia. The girl pondered, feeling so sad, suddenly having the opportunity to play a new character, and the villain at that. Figuring there was no reason not to start this game, she clicked the start button. Mary, the maid, chased after Claudia, who had already been living in this role for a month, wanting to know what had happened. The protagonist smiled and said everything was fine. She had just been startled by a bug. The maid announced that the tea party preparations were complete and invited the girl to the table. The protagonist promised to be there soon, but in her heart, she was still struggling to adapt to the new role. The beginning of the game didn't foreshadow anything special. She had to choose a profession for the character, just like before. The girl decided to choose Spirit Binder, for which she needed to awaken 5 spirits scattered across Balkanis and form contracts with them. After studying the task, the girl thought it wouldn't be easy to complete. However, a warning popped up in the game, stating that if she failed, the protagonist would die. Deciding to leave the game for tomorrow, the girl went to bed, completely unaware that she would wake up in Claudia's body after closing her eyes. In the past 200 endings, the protagonist had died every time because of her bad personality. However, this time she might die before finding those spirits. So now she needed to act as quickly as possible. She needed to rebuild her reputation to reach the end, and the more supporters she had, the better. So she needed to apologize for her misdeeds and resolve any misunderstandings. Claudia came to the gazebo in the garden, where Nila was already pouring tea and Luke was standing beside her. This was the female lead's older brother, Luke. According to the plot, he resented his sister because of her dark past. Claudia asked Luke not to look at her like that and apologized for being late, assuming he had arrived early. Nila stood behind them, modestly lowering her head. The female lead's only joy in moving here was that she could now see her in person. Suddenly, Luke stepped between the two girls, demanding his sister explain what she was up to. He had come only to find out what Claudia was scheming this time, so they would listen to her and then leave. Luke stated he had no interest in this silly tea party. Claudia had been trying to be a kind protagonist for a month, wanting to wash away her villainous reputation, but so far she hadn't noticed any changes. The girl didn't know what to do, as Luke's gaze was still full of malice, and he didn't even consider changing his opinion of his sister. Claudia pondered this, and Luke urged her to answer, mistaking her silence for arrogance. The girl decided her brother was hopeless and smiled, telling him to shut up and leave. Luke was discouraged by her suggestion, while the female lead insisted that if he didn't like it, he could leave, because if some things couldn't be changed, it was better not to get involved and just go around. When her brother expressed indignation at her words, Claudia suggested to Nila that she make him leave so they could talk privately. However, she suddenly replied that if Luke left, she would leave too. Apparently, the girl still felt uncomfortable around Claudia, as the memories of being bullied had not yet been forgotten. With that, the female lead rubbed her head and said they could have tea another day if Nila wanted. Realizing she had a long way to go to achieve her goal, she turned to leave, listening to her brother's endless shouting. Nila tried to calm his anger, telling Luke to cool down and suggesting he go for a walk. He apologized for not being able to educate his sister properly, but the girl replied that he had nothing to apologize for. She cast an angry glance at Claudia's retreating figure, saying that everything was his sister's fault. The female lead returned to the castle in a bad mood, upset that her mood had been ruined. As she walked down the hallway, she heard the maids talking, saying that she had tried her best, but was still driven away without even conversation. When Claudia approached, the maids all ran off. To summarize this month full of effort, the female lead had achieved nothing. Therefore, she decided to review all her goals and adjust her original plan. The female lead's first goal was to get rid of her villainous reputation and make friends with everyone, but she had completely failed at this. She had underestimated their attitude towards Claudia, and if she hadn't achieved results by now, she wouldn't be loved in the future. Therefore, the female lead crossed out this goal and set a new one, deciding to leave this place. Claudia wrote in her diary that her second goal was to repair her relationship with Nila and become her friend. She knew it wouldn't be easy, and although it seemed like it would take a long time now, as Nila was avoiding her, the female lead wasn't going to give up. Finally, Claudia needed to talk to Prince Regis, as he was the one who executed her former fiancé, and there was no guarantee he wouldn't kill her this time. Therefore, the female lead decided to talk to him first and dispel his negative perception of her, as perhaps he could even help her find the perfume. However, Claudia didn't expect it would be so difficult to meet with him, as one time he made an appointment in a place that didn't even exist. Another time, he suggested the girl meet near the dungeons, and she ended up being chased by monsters. Despite Claudia's best efforts, she couldn't see Regis. Mary entered the room and told her mistress that she had received a letter from His Highness. The letter said that Regis had finished his field work and returned to the palace, where he would stay for a while, and therefore proposed a visit tomorrow morning. The next day, Claudia sat in the living room waiting for the prince, who had finally made an appointment with her in a safe place. The maids noticed the girl had been sitting there since morning, commenting that His Highness's attitude toward her was already too much. The female lead herself was also worried. She had to wait for several hours, while the maids and knights couldn't say where the prince was. Suddenly, the girl realized that he might be doing this just to test her, but Claudia wanted to believe Regis wouldn't do that. Exhausted from waiting, the female lead got up and prepared to go back. It was already dark when she left the palace, regretting another fruitless day. As she walked past the greenhouse in the garden, she suddenly noticed a familiar figure inside, initially thinking it was a hallucination. However, Claudia couldn't be mistaken, as the heir to the throne of Belcano, the second prince, Regis, was sitting there. Claudia entered the greenhouse and walked towards the coffee table where the prince was sitting. The young woman bowed to Regis, who put down the book he'd been holding and turned to her. Claudia couldn't help but wonder if he had been here the whole time she'd been waiting for him in the castle. He replied that he had eaten, taken a walk, and had tea during that time, and only now had sat down to read for a while. Claudia was bewildered, as he was the one who had asked to meet her, and she had been waiting for him all day since morning. Regis was disappointed that Claudia thought he didn't have time for her. He was so surprised by the girl's lack of understanding that every time he felt she was being pretentious, he wanted to get rid of her. Claudia refused to believe that Regis was simply mocking her. Looking at him, the young woman suddenly remembered what had happened before she was reborn into this body. When she learned she was an orphan, while working at a restaurant, people mocked her. They said they had checked all the expired products and instructed her to throw them away. The manager, standing next to the girl, accused her of allegedly throwing away valuable products and began to threaten her. He smashed a tomato against the wall, ordering her to behave herself if she didn't want to meet the same fate as the vegetable. Now, if it were Claudia's will, she would really like to teach this blonde man a lesson. The protagonist suddenly saw Regis from a completely different perspective, but she couldn't make an enemy of the prince. Therefore, Claudia smiled and said that she only regretted that he hadn't told her everything from the beginning, making her suffer. The prince looked at the girl in bewilderment and asked what she actually wanted. The protagonist quickly thought about how to answer this question, not wanting to let it go, and asked the prince to break off the engagement and let them part ways. Regis, surprised, jumped up from the table. Claudia insisted on her proposal, claiming that this was what they both wanted. The prince didn't understand how she intended to do this and what to say to her parents, but the girl was sure that if Regis tried a little, negotiating with them wouldn't be so difficult. After making him promise to try and talk to the emperor, Claudia hurried home. The prince didn't understand what was wrong with the girl. He felt that her character had completely changed. The protagonist left the palace very satisfied, as she had figured out how to avenge Regis's insult. The Belcano Empire had two princes. The eldest prince, Nathan, was originally supposed to become the emperor, as he was the firstborn. But he had a curse on him. Whenever he touched a girl, he would suffer terrible pain. Unable to produce an heir, the prince was quickly deposed. But as far as Claudia knew, if this curse was lifted, he would regain his position as the first heir. If he won, then Regis would lose his status and go mad with rage. Therefore, Claudia was fully confident that if she could lift Nathan's curse, she would receive a considerable reward, because then she could become empress. The protagonist went to find the man. Having come before him, she silently looked at him for a while with a confident gaze. Taking a deep breath, she immediately asked Nathan to marry her. Long ago, the founding emperor stole someone's precious sacred relic. After that, he successfully ruled the entire continent. But then something happened, and now Claudia stood before Nathan, asking him to marry her. Despite being the first prince, his importance in the game wasn't particularly prominent. He was just a supporting character. Apparently, because of the curse, he was always wrapped up tightly, because if he touched a girl, his life could be in danger. The protagonist felt sorry for Nathan, but she understood that he could be her trump card. He asked Claudia again what she meant, and the girl repeated her request. Nathan couldn't understand how his brother's fiancé could say such a thing. The protagonist was sure that the emperor would listen to the one who caused him pain. She told Nathan that Prince Regis not only disliked her, but even hated her. If Claudia was destined to marry one of them, then she would prefer to choose the one who didn't despise her. Therefore, she proposed a fake marriage to Nathan, where he wouldn't have to fulfill his husbandly duties. The prince pondered, as he hadn't had such an interesting conversation in a long time. He understood why Claudia had come to him, but wondered what he would get in return. The girl promised that if Nathan helped her, she would fulfill his greatest desire. Claudia claimed that she could lift the curse placed on the prince. Nathan's eyes filled with anger, and he ordered the girl to leave. He reminded her what a terrible sin it was to insult a member of the imperial family. Claudia claimed that she hadn't insulted him and could really help the prince. According to Nathan, hundreds of people like her had already come to him, and his mother, believing these swindlers, spared no expense. But they were all betrayed by their strong emotions, and the empress fell ill and died soon after. Nathan turned to leave, but Claudia caught up with him, claiming he should trust her. He could sue her for mistreatment, but if he missed this opportunity, he would have to live the rest of his life alone. The girl claimed the late empress wanted to prevent all of this. Nathan said he would forgive her this time, but asked her not to appear before him again. The protagonist thought she knew this game like the back of her hand, but the reality was very different from her initial thoughts. This was especially noticeable in the characters. Although this might be because she was playing the villain this time. Nathan was just an ordinary supporting character, so she didn't know the details about him, but now she felt more pity for him. However, the girl was sure she could help him, because she knew how to lift the curse. In one of the endings, she was an alchemist and had to learn the recipes for hundreds of different potions due to completely unexpected quests appearing in the game. Now the protagonist could use her knowledge, so after a while, a potion made from purple herbs that could loosen the curse had already been poured into a bottle. Drinking it unprepared could be dangerous, so it was better to build up immunity through physical actions, which would take Claudia a minute before Nathan realized. She wasn't lying. A few days later, she came to the palace, but found that His Highness had already left for the forest on a mission against monsters and wouldn't be back until evening. Meanwhile, in the Annecy's forest, the knights were trying to find Prince Nathan. Suddenly, they noticed a strange sound behind them and realized something was there. It turned out to be a giant mandrake, which opened its huge, sharp-toothed maw and attacked the knights. Before the squad could react, Prince Nathan immediately appeared and split the monster in half with his sword. The knights noticed the prince was covered in the mandrake slime, but he wiped it off, claiming everything was fine. Nathan ordered them to capture 2 more and then return to the palace. After completing the task, the squad, led by the prince, returned from the forest. During this time, Claudia had been waiting for him in the palace drawing room. Seeing the tired master in a dirty cloak, the servant offered to prepare a bath for him. Suddenly, he remembered Claudia sitting in the drawing room. The servant informed Nathan that Miss Lubelo was waiting for an audience. The prince was surprised that she had returned after he had let her go. Despite the girl's misconduct, Nathan took off his cloak and told the servant to ignore her, as Claudia wasn't even worth his response. When a maid finally entered the drawing room, the protagonist jumped up from the sofa, wondering why she had to wait so long. The maid apologized. His Highness asked me to tell you that he doesn't wish to see Miss Lubelo. Having said these words, the maid hurried out of the drawing room, not giving Claudia a chance to speak. Everything was worse than she had imagined, as Nathan hadn't even shown up to see her. The prince sat in the bathroom, pondering why it had to be the mandrake slime that got on him. Claudia needed to check her plan again before starting today's operation. She needed to get into the first prince's room through tight security, give him the curse-lifting potion, and then arrange a marriage of convenience. Playing Nila was difficult, but Claudia had her own world here too. Of course, there were simple endings where she could choose a profession, but the protagonist didn't want to go down that road. There was also a servant ending, where she needed to deliver love letters to the knights or get the ledger recording bribes. Following the orders of a high-ranking official, the protagonist studied the structure of the entire castle. Of course, she hadn't expected to use her knowledge of the career endings like this, but now she was crawling through a dog hole. She needed to reach the servants' quarters, from where she could follow the corridor to the end, where the first prince's bedroom was. Claudia guessed he was resting now, but she really needed to see Nathan. Although she had wanted to appear without alarming him, the plan failed because when he saw the girl, the prince screamed in fright. The protagonist didn't understand how she had appeared directly in his bedroom when she hadn't even passed through the corridor yet. To Nathan's confusion about how she had entered his room, Claudia lowered her head and greeted him. Then she stated that she had come here to prove that she could lift his curse. The prince watched in surprise as Claudia opened a bottle and drank its contents. When she took off her cloak, he told her to stop fooling around and leave his room. Claudia stood before Nathan with her shoulders bare, suggesting he touch her so he could understand. The prince backed away in fear, lost his balance, and fell. He forbade Claudia from touching him and called for the guards, but the heroine claimed to have already drunk the potion and walked towards him. She asked Nathan to touch her lightly to confirm the potion's effect. The prince covered his face with his hands, saying he couldn't do it. Nathan, his face flushed with agitation, begged the girl to leave. Claudia touched his forehead to check his temperature, noticing how handsome he was. When the heroine was convinced that the prince didn't have a fever, he suddenly realized he didn't feel any pain from her touch. The girl noticed this too, and Nathan sat there completely dejected. It was so unbelievable to him that he reached out and touched Claudia's face. Nathan stood in front of the girl, touching her hand, then gripping her shoulder. Suddenly coming to his senses, the prince apologized to the heroine. He said that he had gotten some mandrake slime on him today, and Claudia should know the properties of this plant, so it would be best for her to go home today. This slime contains a component that causes attraction. However, seeing such a rude person apologize to her, Claudia somehow wanted to tease him. Claudia approached Nathan and asked how she could help him. The prince embraced the girl tighter, saying that from now on, she could help him in many ways. Things escalated quickly, and the next morning, Claudia woke up in Nathan's bed. She remembered everything that happened between them. The heroine understood that it was her fault as she touched him knowing the effects of the mandrake slime. Now she blamed herself for doing such a thing to someone she didn't know very well, while she was immersed in uncovering the ending. Nathan entered the room, surprised that the girl was up so early. Claudia was surprised to find that he wasn't covering his face today and noted that he looked much better this way. The prince asked the girl if she slept well last night, and she suggested they skip the pleasantries and talk about what they didn't have time to discuss yesterday. He looked at the girl, thought for a moment, and agreed to talk, since it was already established that Claudia wasn't lying. She proposed that the prince sign a contract. In exchange for Nathan marrying Miss Rebello, she would lift his curse, and after a year, the contract would be terminated. The prince expressed concern about whether such conditions were suitable for the girl herself, because in addition to love, she would also lose the opportunity to become empress in their marriage. By marrying Regis, Claudia smiled, as she actually planned to become empress by marrying Nathan, but she didn't say it out loud. Suddenly, the prince said he didn't care, because if he got rid of the curse, he would become the heir anyway. If he could produce an heir, the reason for him not being able to become emperor would disappear. To Claudia's surprise, Nathan turned out to be so ambitious, and now everything might be easier than she thought. She smiled, talking about the mutually beneficial nature of their marriage, and the prince agreed. Claudia promised Nathan that she would do her best to help him ascend to the throne. As for last night, the girl asked if it was a mutual mistake. She promised to try to forget about it, so Nathan could relax too. According to her, such personal matters would only hinder their goals. After signing the document, the prince looked up at Claudia and suggested they not bring up this topic anymore, as what happened, and the girl agreed. They decided to start planning after receiving His Majesty's permission, as Nathan didn't want to delay. He got up from a table and headed for the door, and Claudia was surprised by this haste. The heroine noticed the prince's tendency to solve problems immediately, and she liked that. According to Nathan, his father wasn't in good health right now, and he was worried that breaking off the engagement might worry him. Claudia suggested first putting maximum pressure on His Majesty to obtain permission for the wedding, and the matters of the curse and the throne could be discussed after the marriage. They entered the throne room where the emperor was sitting, and from his appearance, it was clear that he was unwell. Regis, who was also asked to be present, stood beside him, both of them puzzled by what was about to be discussed. Nathan bowed respectfully and asked for his father's and brother's forgiveness. The emperor wondered what was going on and demanded a clearer explanation. The first prince announced his desire to spend the rest of his life with Miss Rebello, requesting permission for their relationship. The emperor jumped up from his throne in anger, saying that his son was crazy to covet his younger brother's fiancé. According to Nathan, he had thought he would die alone, but Claudia's appearance changed his mind. He said she was the only one willing to spend eternity with him despite the curse, so he didn't want to let her go. The emperor demanded an explanation from Claudia. Watching Nathan's excellent performance, the girl realized she couldn't make a mistake. She confessed to His Majesty that she and Nathan were deeply in love and requested permission for them to be together. She explained that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. After long consideration, she was certain of her sincere feelings. Now, she was convinced they could overcome any obstacle as long as they had love. Claudia said the curse didn't matter to her. As long as they had love, they could face it together. The girl promised to take care of Nathan for the rest of her life, while Nathan also tried to convince his father that this was his first and last love. Regis, unable to bear it any longer, ordered them both to stop their nonsense. The prince knew they hated him, but he didn't understand how they could humiliate him so openly. Nathan and Claudia asked him to calm down, saying that they were the only ones to blame and not to worry about his dignity. Claudia admitted she didn't quite understand the prince's reaction, as he loved another woman, but she was interrupted before she could finish. The emperor interjected, apologizing to Regis and reminding him that he could have anyone he wanted, a right his brother didn't have. If Nathan and Claudia's feelings were genuine, then he granted them permission to be together. They exchanged smiles, as everything was going according to plan so far. After the audience, the young couple drank tea in the gazebo, discussing how well they had performed. Claudia said she needed to respond appropriately to her future husband's efforts. Since they had completed this stage, she suggested Nathan move on to the second phase. Now, they needed to talk to her father. With the Emperor's permission, it shouldn't be a problem. Nathan hadn't expected them to address the issue with her parents so quickly. The girl believed tedious tasks needed to be dealt with swiftly. The prince noticed she was treating their actions as a mission. He asked if he still needed to meet with the Duke if he would agree anyway. Claudia jumped up from her seat with glee, completely confident about the matter. She could go to the Duke's territory alone. After a hasty farewell, she left the castle, leaving Nathan sitting pensively in the greenhouse. Duke Rebello was a great commander who had led the country to victory in the war against the Spurred Duchy 17 years ago. Claudia had heard many times that he was the strongest man in the world. However, her father had left before she entered Claudia's body, so they had never met. However, the day after her visit to the palace, the Duke unexpectedly returned. When Claudia met a maid at the door, the maid asked why she had returned so late, as her father had been looking everywhere for her. Claudia started to feel nervous, worried about whether she could persuade her father. As she entered the room, she heard the Duke's angry roar from the doorway, expressing his displeasure at her prolonged absence. Claudia saw his true, ferocious appearance, completely befitting the image of the world's strongest man. The Duke continued shouting as he walked towards her, and she feared he was going to hit her. However, to the girl's surprise, her father hugged her tightly, admitting he had missed her terribly. This astonished Claudia. The Duke kindly asked her why she had gone to the palace and stayed there for several days. He was completely different from the person Claudia had imagined, so after calming down, she told him she had gone to see her fiancé. Sitting at the coffee table, she clarified that she hadn't gone to see the crown prince, but Prince Nathan. She asked her father not to be too frightened and confessed that she wanted to break off her engagement with Regis and marry his brother instead. Faced with the Duke's bewilderment, Claudia replied that the prince didn't love her and she didn't want to spend her life unhappy with someone like that. However, the Duke considered the crown prince a heretic and wouldn't tolerate his daughter wanting to marry someone who couldn't touch her. Claudia claimed she could lift Nathan's curse and that they had already explained everything to His Majesty and received permission. The Duke was perplexed by his daughter's disrespect in not consulting him, but she pleaded with him to listen. However, the Duke didn't want to hear her explanation at all and ordered Claudia to be locked up as punishment for her insolence. Meanwhile, back at the castle, someone advised Nathan not to overexert himself, as he had already fought 20 battles and there were no knights left willing to train with him. Nathan asked his aide to train with him, but the aide refused. Just then, Regis walked over and announced that he would be the crown prince's opponent. During the sparring match, Nathan turned around and saw his brother struggling to hold his sword. The prince was trembling all over, as he clearly had no idea how to wield a sword. When Nathan scolded him about it, Regis yelled, demanding not to be underestimated. He lunged at Nathan with his sword, but Nathan stepped back, and Regis lost his balance and fell. The prince couldn't understand how his older brother could do this. Even though he hated him, he was furious that Nathan's actions had put him in such a predicament. Regis was sure that Claudia would now laugh at him. Nathan claimed it was all fabricated, as Regis himself had never cared about the girl's feelings. After all, she wouldn't want to marry someone who had another woman in his heart. Regis was resentful that Nathan cared about Claudia's feelings while ignoring his own brother's. However, he was confused as to whether he had any right to side with the brother who supposedly hated him. Regis then abruptly admitted that Nathan was right. He had never loved Claudia. Still, he felt that if his brother truly loved the girl, he wouldn't have let her go talk to her father alone, who might have locked her up somewhere. After all, everyone knew what kind of man Duke Rebello was. He was known as a killer on the battlefield, and now Claudia had gone to see him alone to tell him about breaking off the engagement and that she was going to marry her former fiancé's brother. Meanwhile, at the Duke's mansion, Claudia looked around her room, surprised that she had to spend her confinement in such comfortable surroundings. Just then, Nerra and Luke appeared at the door. Luke had already heard the rumors of his sister breaking off her engagement with Prince Regis. He assumed it was one of Claudia's schemes to win the prince's favor. Claudia told her brother that His Majesty had allowed them not to marry. She also told Luke that she was going to marry the first prince, which greatly surprised him, as he had heard that Nathan went into the forest every night to hunt monsters tears and bathe in their blood. Nerra, astonished by Claudia's words, asked again if she was really going to marry Prince Nathan. Claudia felt that now she could finally build a relationship with the girl. She confessed that she hadn't been interested in Regis from the beginning and wholeheartedly supported her feelings. Nerra burst into tears and rushed to the heroine, hugging her tightly in gratitude. Luke, arms crossed over his chest, turned his face away in displeasure, watching the two girls embrace. However, Nerra was very curious to know what Claudia was really up to. At dinner, the Duke was still furious that his daughter had made such an important decision without consulting him. He would burst into tears every time he thought about her marriage. But just then, the butler entered the dining room. He apologized to the Duke for interrupting him and informed him that the first prince had arrived. After greeting Duke Rebello, Nathan announced that he had come to visit his fiancé. He was led to Claudia's room, where Claudia respectfully bowed and greeted the prince. The girl hadn't expected the prince to come here himself and wondered if he was worried about her. Nathan approached Claudia, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and asked why her face was swollen, wondering if her father had hit her. The heroine laughed and said that she had just eaten too many sweets. Although the news of their engagement had angered the Duke and he had locked her up, she couldn't complain, as the conditions here were simply luxurious. Claudia believed that Nathan should stop hiding his face from her and everyone else, as the heir to the throne should face his subjects bravely and proudly. According to her, they had another problem, which was the Duke's unwillingness to let her marry him. Duke Rebello sincerely believed that he was doing this out of concern for his daughter's well-being. Claudia admitted that her father believed the first prince suffered from impotence. Noticing the confusion on Nathan's face, the girl explained that her father was worried about the curse placed on the prince. However, she had already found a solution to this problem, and she took out a vial of potion. Claudia immediately drank it, as now they would be able to prove to others that the rumors about Nathan were false. The prince, looking intently at the girl, decided to trust her plan. The Duke couldn't understand why Nathan had come to his mansion, as he had always deliberately avoided it. According to Claudia, the prince wanted to clarify a few things before they came here. They agreed that once the girl gave a signal, Nathan had to show that they were able to touch each other. So now, the first prince asked the Duke to watch carefully what would happen next. Nathan took Claudia's hand and raised it high. He asked her father to note that his hand was bare and that he could calmly touch the girl. However, Duke Rebello believed they couldn't deceive him this way. Impatient with the prince's hesitation, the heroine turned to face him, as they needed a more convincing argument. She knew a surefire way to convince her father, so she kissed Nathan on the lips in front of him. The Duke cried out in surprise and immediately ordered them to stop, while the embarrassed prince covered his face with his hands. Claudia explained that she couldn't prove to her father the seriousness of their intentions any other way, and that her touch was completely painless. However, the Duke was furious at her actions, especially since Claudia refused a chance to become empress and was ruining her future. Claudia believed there was no more exquisite way to ruin one's life than to marry a man she didn't love. However, Nathan, taking her hand, interrupted her, asking how the Duke dared to insult a member of the royal family by saying such things in his presence. After all, besides everything else, Nathan was going to reclaim the throne taken by Regis. Thanks to Claudia, he would be able to have an heir, a circumstance that would help resolve the issues of his reign. The Duke pondered, as the first prince wasn't afraid to express his opinion in front of the man everyone called murderer. Moreover, Nathan was quite handsome, and now Lord Rebello felt that this man was quite suitable for his daughter. Suddenly, he wondered if Claudia was simply captivated by his beautiful appearance. The Duke couldn't believe his daughter would be obsessed with the first prince's beauty, yet he decided not to dwell on such trifles, as Prince Nathan's words weren't illogical. Although he would have to fight against Regis, who had already strengthened his position, wouldn't be easy. He stated that since Claudia had chosen Nathan, he could only accept it. But the prince would have to prove that his intentions to clear his name weren't empty words. If Nathan proved to be better at hunting monsters than the Duke, he would give them permission to marry. The monster hunt began immediately that evening. Claudia felt it was too much for Nathan to compete with the murderer of the Belcani's empire. The Duke yielded to his daughter's persuasion, allowing her to watch the hunt, but demanded that she not forget that it was dangerous. There was magical protection within the shelter prepared for her in the forest, and she was not to leave it under any circumstances. The hunt would last 5 hours, at the end of which they would compare the number of monsters killed. Heading to the shelter, Claudia was truly curious how all of this would end. Hunting monsters in the eastern part of the forest, the prince was sure he would make the Duke pay for his arrogance. Meanwhile, Lord Rebello, in the western forest, wasn't going to hand his daughter over to the prince so easily. A few hours later, Claudia felt hungry, while her father and Nathan still hadn't returned. Mary entered the shelter with a basket of food, telling her that the Duke wouldn't be back yet, as he intended to have dinner right in the forest. Remembering her bag, which she had left somewhere outside, the protagonist peeked out of the tent. She remembered her father's words about the protective barrier, but she intended to run out and grab the bag, which was only a few meters away. On his way back, the prince confessed to the Duke that he had been so engrossed in the hunt that he had completely lost track of time. He was worried about Claudia being left alone, because despite the protective barrier, it was difficult for the girl to sit still. Although the Duke was sure his daughter was an obedient girl and didn't doubt her prudence, Claudia still left the tent. At that moment, she was spotted by Nathan, returning from the hunt, and her father, who immediately ordered her to return to the shelter. While father and daughter were arguing, Nathan suddenly saw something huge flying up behind Claudia. Looking closely, he realized that a gargoyle was flying straight at the girl with terrifying speed. Nathan instantly rushed forward, shielding Claudia with his body, knocking her to the ground. The Duke ran to the rescue, fearing for his highness's life, and stared in horror at the wound on the prince's back, anxiously asking if Claudia was all right. Back at the palace, the protagonist had Nathan lie down on the bed to treat his wound, asking him to be patient and promising that the pain wouldn't be too severe. However, when she applied the medicine to his back, the prince cried out in pain, and the girl couldn't help but wonder why he had so recklessly sacrificed himself. Just as Nathan asked if this was her gratitude for saving her life, the Duke entered the room and asked to speak with the prince privately. Left alone, Nathan asked Lord Rebello what he wanted to talk about. The Duke decided to approve their marriage, as he was touched by Nathan's act of unhesitatingly and swiftly saving Claudia. Now he felt that the prince's feelings for his daughter were pure and sincere, and that marriage should not be with the one you love, but with the one who loves you. The Duke worried that he was saying too much, as Nathan clearly didn't know about Claudia's past. However, since the prince didn't want to learn the truth from others, he revealed that his daughter used to write several letters to Regis every day and often sang love songs for him. However, the Duke was sure that her interest in the prince, who hadn't paid her any attention, was a thing of the past. A few days later, the Duke saw Claudia and Nathan off, glad that everything had ended well. Sitting in the carriage, Claudia suggested to Nathan that they hold an engagement ceremony first, as it was time to prepare for the wedding. However, the prince remained silent, staring fiercely somewhere. The young woman touched his shoulder, wondering what was wrong, thinking that Nathan hadn't yet recovered from his injury. The prince pulled away from her, demanding that she maintain a proper distance and refrain from touching him without permission, as they had a contractual relationship, nothing more. Luke watched his sister's carriage leave, stepping back from the window. He couldn't believe that this was real, that she was actually going to marry Nathan. He thought they were hiding something, but Nerra wanted to believe that this time it was completely different. Luke pleaded with the girl not to deceive herself and to remember all of her sister's previous atrocities. Nerra asked him not to say that, as he was always finding fault with everything, and it worried her. However, the man believed that they needed to expose Claudia's plans no matter what and prepare for the consequences. Nerra thought he was talking nonsense, as they couldn't possibly prepare for something they knew nothing about. Nerra sat on the bed, pondering Claudia's change. Until now, she had always been able to calculate her every step, anticipate all her actions, but suddenly her attitude towards others had changed. Nerra couldn't understand what Claudia was thinking now, how she had suddenly given up on Prince Regis. She recalled a childhood memory of knocking on a door and asking to be let in. She stood on the stairs in bewilderment, a dark-haired woman lying at the foot of the staircase, calling her name. Nerra tried to convince herself that there was nothing to worry about, as it didn't matter what Claudia did. If she suddenly became an obstacle, they would simply get rid of her, as that was the fate that awaited them. A white-haired man stood on the balcony, gazing into the distance, illuminated by the bright light of the full moon. He intended to continue with his plans, confident that the time had finally come. Claudia presented His Majesty the Emperor with her father's gift and politely inquired about his health. Nathan announced to his father his intention to hold a small engagement ceremony before the wedding, as many still believed that Prince Regis and Miss Rebello were to be wed, and he wished to clarify this as soon as possible. The young woman emerged from the fitting room in a magnificent dress and asked Nathan what he thought. The prince disapproved of the plunging neckline, hinting at this to her. The girl agreed and went to try on something else. Nathan, finding the shop too stuffy, headed for the exit. At that moment, he overheard women behind the wall discussing Claudia's arrival there, accompanied by the first prince. The women gossiped about their upcoming wedding and how Rebello used to want an heir, but apparently it was just a fleeting infatuation. The ladies began discussing Nathan's curse and how different he was from his brother. In their opinion, Prince Regis was like light, while Prince Nathan was darkness. The first prince himself was intently listening to all the conversations behind the wall. Claudia suddenly appeared out of nowhere, her face flushed with anger, and quickly walked past him towards the gossipers. Approaching them, she smiled and asked one of them if she was Lady Felicia, the one having an affair with Lord Chase. The women were startled by her appearance, and Felicia was outraged at how Claudia knew such details. Thus, the lady revealed her secret to her friends, and realizing this, she stood there with her hand covering her mouth. Claudia turned to Lady Davy, inquiring how she was doing, as she had invested quite a bit of money in the Kavala Temple to curse Lady Adeline. Lady Davy also exposed herself when the young woman declared that her plan wouldn't work, as the person she wanted to curse drank an anti-curse potion every night. The women said they wouldn't pay attention to such empty talk anymore and hurried out of the shop. Claudia was outraged by their callousness towards the cursed. Nathan thought they were right in some aspects, as he had lived his whole life in darkness. However, the young woman claimed that he wasn't to blame for his misfortune, and it was completely unacceptable to say such things. Moreover, she thought that the only bright thing about that annoying Prince Regis was his hair and eyes, realizing she had said too much. Claudia fell silent. Nathan didn't understand why she found it amusing that people viewed Regis that way. After all, they said Claudia used to have feelings for him, and rumor had it he was indeed kind. Nathan asked her if she felt this way because his brother had rejected and ignored her feelings. After all, in such a situation, the girl's hostility was completely understandable, since the deeper the love, the deeper the hate. Hearing this, Claudia flew into a rage, yelling at Nathan that she couldn't believe her ears. She swore to him that she had never had any feelings for Prince Regis. He demanded that she stop lying, but she couldn't explain to him that she was from another world. Therefore, she urgently needed to come up with some excuse. According to the protagonist, she had hit her head a month ago and now suffered from amnesia, so she barely remembered Prince Regis. The girl claimed that was the past her, and the current her was a completely different person. The prince had only treated her as an object of ridicule, and that was the extent of their connection. However, Nathan misunderstood her, thinking that Claudia was too eager to forget the past. The girl suggested he leave the shop as soon as possible, promising to tell him all the details later. She just wanted him to know that who she was in the past and who she was now were two completely different people. Nathan chuckled and said that if the girl thought so, then so be it, and followed her out of the shop. At the engagement ceremony, the guests noticed that Claudia looked a little tired. Last night, the girl had a dream where Nerra was crying. In the dream, the protagonist was the Empress, and the girl was yelling at her, saying that the position should belong to her. However, Claudia remembered Nerra saying that she didn't want to be Empress, she only needed Regis. This was very much in line with her character, as the girl always believed that love was more important than power. Because of this agitation, Claudia had been suffering from insomnia for a long time, so much so that even Nathan noticed something was wrong with her. The royal family was sitting at the dining table, and so far everything was going according to the protagonist's plan. She had broken off her engagement with Regis without any problems, and had even gotten engaged to Nathan, but that wasn't enough. She needed to become someone more important than a princess, so she was going to make Nathan the heir to the throne. To find the elves, the girl decided to use her position as the future empress. This was the fastest and most obvious option she could think of, but now she doubted whether she could succeed. Claudia tried to dispel the negative thoughts and keep herself positive and optimistic because so far she had gone through all the endings of this game, and now she needed to focus on what was happening in the present. The emperor praised everyone present. He turned to Regis, glad that his brother had found such a perfect partner. After listening to his words, the prince asked to speak. He announced his engagement to Miss Nerra, praising her gentle nature and spotless reputation as ideal for an empress. The emperor was furious that Regis had immediately turned to her sister after breaking up with Claudia, believing he didn't care at all about what people would think. However, the prince believed that as the soon-to-be emperor, he didn't have to care about public opinion. Nathan said he didn't care at all about his brother's relationship with Nerra, but he asked Regis to stop mentioning that he would become emperor. Despite the discomfort his brother might feel at his words, he announced his intention to reclaim what he had briefly lost. When Nathan declared his intention to reclaim the throne, Regis jumped up in anger. He didn't understand how his brother could forget his curse, but Nathan claimed he hadn't forgotten the curse that had ruined his life. He stood up and took off his gloves in front of everyone present. He turned to Claudia and extended his hand to her, and the girl, who loved dramatic moments, smiled. She reached out to Nathan, and Regis watched in surprise as his brother calmly took his fiancé's hand. Not only was the second prince surprised, but even the emperor himself was in disbelief. Nathan stated that since meeting Claudia, his curse had weakened, and now he could inherit the throne. The emperor held his head, not understanding how this was possible, as the curse of their family had never disappeared. Claudia smiled and said that she and Nathan considered this a blessing from heaven, a sign of the god's support for their love. Noticing the disappointment on Regis's face, she asked him why he wasn't happy for his brother. According to the prince, he was happy about the disappearance of the curse, but not about the succession to the throne. After all, he had been learning how to be a competent ruler, while his brother had spent all his free time hunting monsters. Nathan questioned how Regis could call saving people from death a waste of time. He sacrificed himself for his brother's future, foregoing swordsmanship training and other essential lessons for a crown prince, as he took on Regis's responsibilities. The emperor, coughing, ordered his two sons to stop arguing. According to him, while Regis had been preparing to inherit the throne, Nathan was no less worthy, as he had been risking his life for the empire. The emperor believed both his sons were qualified to inherit the throne, but the princes didn't appreciate this sentiment. There couldn't be two emperors, so the best candidate needed to be chosen. His Majesty received news from his spies about suspicious activity in the Aspur Duchy. Aspur was the nation defeated by the Empire before Claudia's birth for attacking them. They were likely preparing for revenge, and war might be imminent. The emperor decided that if war broke out, he would pass the throne to whoever performed better in the conflict. Claudia had an idea and expressed her agreement with His Majesty's wise decision. According to her, this situation was perfect for testing who was more qualified to be the heir. Turning to her brothers, the girl asked if everyone agreed with His Majesty's decision. Leaving the dining hall, Nathan found it strange that Claudia was so excited about this situation. He wanted her to reveal what she was planning, and she admitted she did have a plan. First, she needed a ship, a commander, and an army, and they also needed to go somewhere. Claudia intended to sail to Shark Bay Island, home to the water spirit. The girl knew there were almost no resources there, and that it was a dangerous area full of monsters. However, the water spirit lived on the island, and whoever made a contract with it could freely use its power. Since this power would certainly help them in war, Claudia asked the prince to prepare everything. She said if only Nathan knew how perfect this was for her, as she could now kill two birds with one stone, not only helping Nathan, but also finding the spirit. However, the prince wasn't easily fooled and wanted to know how the girl knew all this. According to Claudia, she had once dreamed of becoming a geographer, so she had read many books. Technically, she wasn't lying, as she had indeed experienced this ending in the game. According to Nathan, her plan was difficult to execute because the spirits were very dangerous, but the girl asked him not to worry, as she had already thought everything through. Therefore, she would immediately ask her father for permission to travel. A few days later, Claudia arrived at the manor and explained the matter to the Duke. Since the trip to the island would help Nathan and the entire country, her father gave his permission, but he was afraid to let her go to such a dangerous place. Duke Rebello felt that the prince's presence alone wasn't enough and wanted someone to accompany Claudia. After thinking for a while, he finally remembered that besides his daughter, he also had a son who could go with them. However, Luke wasn't enthusiastic about the Duke's idea at all, and the Duke didn't want to hear any objections. He was sure the children could become friends through this, but Luke didn't want to be friends with Claudia. He only acknowledged Nerra as his sister. The boys slammed the door and left the room. The Duke was saddened because his wife, before her death, had poured all her heart into her son and his education. The Duchess had died in an accident during Claudia's illness. Perhaps after the mediator between the children was gone, their relationship deteriorated to the point of hatred. That night, Luke told Nerra about Claudia's trip to Shark Bay Island. The girl didn't understand what was happening, as it would still take 3 weeks to train the army. Back at the castle, Claudia felt very tired and thought she might be catching a cold. However, the most important thing was that she had successfully obtained permission for the trip because after Luke's refusal, she thought the trip was hopeless for her. For some reason, the protagonist felt that the atmosphere in the palace had changed, although she didn't rule out that it was just an illusion caused by her discomfort. Nathan came out to greet the girl, and she told him that she had already received permission for the trip. Claudia asked the prince if anything had happened in the castle while she was away, as the atmosphere seemed tense. According to Nathan, unpleasant rumors about their relationship had spread. The girl blamed herself for not being vigilant enough, as she knew very well that this place was like a rumor mill. According to Nathan, people were discussing her second engagement, the prince himself, and everything else imaginable. These rumors might soon reach the emperor's ears, so he wanted to know if the girl had a plan to deal with them. She believed that the rumors about her abandoning her brother and getting engaged to the first prince were the lightest punishment she deserved. However, Claudia came up with a brilliant idea to quell the gossip. As night fell, the young woman entered Nathan's room, declaring she knew a way to prove their love to everyone. The Belcano Empire was a fairly liberal country, which was why a second engagement was permitted, since spending the night together before marriage was a symbol of love. This was the only way to silence the rumors. Nathan finally understood Claudia's true intentions. Claudia seemed determined to repeat what had happened on their first night. He recalled the young woman saying that night had been a mistake and she would try to forget it. And now Claudia claimed that personal issues shouldn't prevent them from achieving their goals, and it wasn't a difficult task. Noticing the horrified expression on Nathan's face, Claudia told him not to take it too seriously. The prince agreed, saying he was going to wash up, and Claudia replied that she was going to bed. She promised to give him the bed and wished Nathan good night, leaving him standing there in disbelief. Now he finally understood his misunderstanding. They were just going to sleep in the same room. However, when Nathan lay in bed, he couldn't fall asleep. He got up to check if Claudia was asleep. Approaching the sofa, he thought about how to cover the sleeping young woman with a blanket, but found something was wrong with her. Claudia was trembling all over, her cheeks were burning, and her face was covered in sweat. He knelt beside the sofa where Claudia was lying and asked her what was wrong. Nathan touched Claudia's forehead and found she was burning up. Just as he was about to call for someone, Claudia woke up and stopped him. She said that it would ruin their plan, but Nathan didn't care because she had a fever and needed medicine. Claudia said the fever wouldn't last long and would subside soon. When she woke up the next morning, Claudia felt much better. She touched her forehead and found her temperature had gone down. Then she noticed Nathan sleeping beside her. The prince woke up and asked her how she felt. She said everything was fine and suggested he get some rest now, as he hadn't slept well last night taking care of her. Nathan looked at the young woman and asked why she was always in such a hurry, but she didn't understand what he meant. Claudia had a fever all night, and now she wanted to get up as soon as she opened her eyes. Nathan thought her main goal had been achieved, as she had broken off her engagement and become engaged to him. Therefore, he didn't understand why she was still in such a hurry now, and why she couldn't continue to live at a calmer pace. However, Nathan didn't know that her real goal was to leave this place. To do this, she used someone who truly cared for her, and despite her guilty conscience, she had no other choice. Smiling, she said that although the goal had been achieved, she wanted to help him because her potion had limited effects and was only a temporary measure. It was her first time lifting a curse for someone, and she hadn't found a way to completely remove it, but she wanted to achieve this goal as soon as possible. Nathan asked her what she would do after he ascended the throne and the curse was lifted. Claudia said she would leave this place and go far away, and he wanted to know where. However, even if she explained, he wouldn't understand, because that place was too different from the world he was familiar with. She had lived there all her life and even paid for university tuition, But in the end, she came here. Claudia confessed to Nathan that she wanted to return to a distant place that His Highness knew nothing about. Nathan wanted her to tell him more, but she just remained silent. He said he understood everything, got up, and suggested she rest because she needed strength to complete all her plans. Claudia was sad because she couldn't even properly thank him for his care. A few days later, Claudia and Nathan, escorted by a group of people, headed to the port. Finally, the preparations for the trip to Shark Island were complete. He and the prince told everyone they were going to look for supplies and didn't mention anything about the water spirit. The luggage was almost loaded, and it was time to board the ship. However, just then, Claudia noticed a familiar figure nearby, scrutinizing her. Noticing the young woman looking at him, Luke asked if she had really decided to go on this trip. When Claudia asked him what he was doing here, the young man replied that he had come to be her escort. Annoyed, she asked what nonsense her brother was talking about. At that moment, Nerra peeked out from behind Luke's shoulder, her appearance surprising Claudia. According to her brother, he hadn't wanted to come, but Nerra was extremely worried about her sister. The girl interrupted him, saying Shark Island was a very dangerous place. Claudia was surprised that Nerra was so worried about her that she not only came herself but also brought Luke along. Realizing this, Claudia happily rushed towards her sister, asking if she was sure she wanted to go, as it was dangerous. Nerra claimed everything would be all right, as they had Luke and His Highness Prince Nathan with them. Nathan silently and intently watched everything unfold, observing Nerra trying to wriggle free from Claudia's embrace. The water spirit sensed someone approaching her domain. Due to the two unexpected additions, Luke had to spend the night in the crew quarters, freeing up a cabin for Nerra. Claudia suggested her sister look at the dresses she had bought in the capital, as their designs differed from those sold in the duchy. To improve her relationship with her sister, Claudia took out the dresses one by one, saying Nerra could choose whichever she liked. According to Claudia, each dress would suit her perfectly, but the girl remained silent. Claudia suggested she try them on to check the sizes and take any she wanted. However, Nerra lowered her head and quietly reminded her sister that she couldn't wear such dresses. Claudia genuinely didn't understand what she meant. Nerra gave a grim smile and said everything was fine, as Claudia didn't have to remember all her sins. She turned and left the room, leaving Claudia confused. Looking at herself in the mirror, Nerra told herself nothing had changed. Claudia was still arrogant and shameless. She didn't understand why her sister was lying, pretending not to know things that were impossible to forget. That day, she was preparing for the banquet, but due to the high humidity, her curls weren't tight enough. With Claudia becoming more outstanding each day, Nerra couldn't allow herself to appear at the banquet with such a poor hairstyle. She ordered the maid to quickly call someone to help with her hair. The next moment, a hand from behind snatched the hot curling iron from the maid, and Nerra felt a sharp pain. Although the maid claimed it was her carelessness, the girl knew someone else must have been behind it. From her room, she watched Claudia enjoying herself at the banquet. Looking at her crazed expression, the girl no longer doubted what had happened. Nerra was certain the hand holding the curling iron belonged to Claudia. Thus, a burn scar remained on the girl's back, preventing her from wearing open-back dresses. Looking at her reflection, she thought that she had become a flawed bride ever since. Now, with Claudia's sudden change in attitude, she felt like Claudia wanted to hurt her again. But this time, Nerra wouldn't just endure it. As she was lost in these thoughts, a knock came at the door. It was her sister asking to come in. When she opened the door, she saw Claudia standing there with a suitcase. Claudia thought Nerra was angry because of the used clothes she had offered. So now, she had brought a set of brand new clothes, one she herself had never worn. Nerra snatched the suitcase from her sister's hands, smiling and thanking her, saying she would gladly accept them. Claudia was completely baffled by her sudden change in mood. A few days later, as the ship approached the island, the wind picked up and heavy rain began to fall, as if the land itself was trying to repel them. Nathan checked the map to determine the spirit's exact location, and Claudia revealed that the spirit resided in a lake at the island center. Legend had it that they could find this lake by following the sound of an ocarina played by the moon. Hearing this, Luke angrily exclaimed that Claudia had organized this entire trip based on such ridiculous nonsense. Claudia started to fume at his words. Noticing this, Nathan decided to prevent the argument from escalating. He turned to Luke and asked why he was being so rude to the princess, especially in front of His Highness. Under his fierce gaze, the boy was at a loss for words, and an awkward silence filled the room. Nerra broke the silence. apologizing to the prince and explaining that her brother was merely worried about those who had come along. According to her, they would surely be disappointed if it turned out there was no spirit after all. Turning to Claudia, she said she knew there was no malice behind her actions, but she thought the girl had been a bit rash in her decision to come to the island. Therefore, Nerra asked Claudia if she would take responsibility if she suddenly died there. Claudia smiled, reassuring her sister not to worry, certain that such a thing wouldn't happen. Suddenly, the ship began to shake violently, and everyone on board screamed. Claudia didn't understand what was happening to the ship since they were already anchored. Suddenly, everyone heard terrified screams from behind the cabin door and jumped up from their seats. They rushed into the corridor and saw a knight yelling that a monster had boarded the ship. A huge water monster with sharp fangs and teeth stood on the deck, ready to attack. Luke cried out in terror that they were all doomed, as the monster was simply too large. However, Claudia suddenly smiled, declaring that everything was going according to her plan. She told Nerra to fetch the bottles of rum she had placed in the storage room. Nerra didn't understand why, but Claudia urged her to hurry, so she obediently ran off to complete the task. Although the water monster was even more disgusting than it appeared in the game, Claudia had transformed from a fisherwoman into a pirate king. She ordered the bugler to stand at the front and sound the horn, while everyone else was to whistle as loudly as possible. Nathan ordered everyone to strictly follow the princess's instructions. A mermaid's ears are sensitive to high-frequency sounds, and Claudia planned to use this method to stun the monster. Nerra immediately ran back and handed the rum bottles to Claudia. Alcohol can dissolve the skin of this type of monster, so when Claudia poured the rum onto the water monster, it screamed and jumped back into the sea, swimming away. Everyone stared in astonishment at the princess, who had successfully repelled the monster. Amidst the knight's cheers and praises, Claudia smiled shyly. Nerra stared at Claudia, who was basking in the praise. Nathan noticed her gaze and saw that Nerra, her lips pursed, suddenly began to tremble. Nerra sat in her cabin, cutting the dress Claudia had given her into shreds. She was furious that the hateful girl would give orders to show off her superiority. Just then, Nathan passed by the cabin and saw Nerra tearing something apart. Hearing her curse and wish someone dead, Claudia sat at her desk, thinking that they didn't have much time. They needed to start searching the island tomorrow morning. She needed to divide the personnel into two groups, one to stay with the ship and the other to go with her. First, she would take Nathan, as he was the most trustworthy. Luke and Nerra were both suspicious, and she considered leaving them on the ship with the injured crew members. Just as she was pondering these things, Nathan entered the office. He asked Claudia what she was still doing here so late, and she admitted that she was considering the personnel arrangements for exploring the island tomorrow. Nathan handed her a piece of the torn dress and told her that Nerra had shredded it in front of him like a mad woman, verbally cursing Claudia to die. The prince wanted to know what had happened between the sisters and why Nerra was so angry. Claudia recognized the fabric as belonging to the dress she had given her sister today. Although she thought it was natural to be hated, she hadn't expected this to apply to Nerra, as in the game, she had lived loyally and honestly in every life. Now Claudia wasn't sure if she truly understood the character. After all, the same story could be completely different from different perspectives. But perhaps the image Claudia saw as Claudia was Nerra's true nature. After all, if the girl truly hated her, then one day she would want to hurt her. If that were the case, Claudia would have to eliminate her. But Nerra had been her best friend back when she would come home from another exhausting part-time job. She would enter the game, her character Nerra entering the academy, and this motivated Claudia to move towards her goals. Although her part-time job in real life was tiring, in the game, she advanced with confidence. Claudia fell asleep, certain that she could handle the difficulties here. Therefore, she now decided not to jump to conclusions before confirming everything herself. She told Nathan that she would inform him of her decision about the search tomorrow, and that she would be setting off with Luke and Nerra. Nathan stared at her in surprise, not understanding why she had made such a decision. Suddenly, she added that the prince himself must remain on the ship. In the morning, Nathan saw off the group heading into the forest to search for the elves. Nerra didn't understand why Claudia had made the prince stay on the ship, as she would be in danger without him. Nerra tried to understand what Claudia had been thinking when she made this decision. Claudia told Nathan that she needed someone to stay behind and protect the ship, as the injured men couldn't handle the task. In his opinion, completing the mission was more important than caring for the wounded, and 3 people weren't enough to handle it. However, Claudia insisted that more soldiers would follow them, and she had already studied the island and knew how to eliminate the monsters there. The young woman was sure that no danger awaited them on the island. She told the prince that it was none of his business, and her decision to bring her brother along was for personal reasons. Nathan reminded her that she had promised to lift his curse and help him ascend to the throne. If Claudia didn't fulfill her promise, he would be in trouble. But the young woman asked him to trust her, saying that everything would be all right. Now he looked at her, regretting that Claudia was unwilling to open up to him. There wasn't a single monster the heroine didn't know how to eliminate, but commanding the soldiers was proving somewhat difficult. She hoped they would trust her, and that she could trust them. Suddenly, the group stopped, hearing a strange buzzing sound coming from the forest. They were poisonous bees. They scattered the soldiers, but Luke ordered them to remain calm and protect the ladies. Claudia ordered them not to approach, to put on protective gear, and to move left along the river to the valley at the foot of the mountain. Nerra watched as the entire group obeyed the heroine's orders without question. A few people remained with Claudia, Luke, and Nerra. The heroine was sure they were all right. The young woman ordered those who could move to check the island for monsters. After looking at the map, she decided to move to higher ground from where everything could be seen. But without a detailed map, they needed to head towards the center of the island. The heroine announced that they would climb the mountain peak after the others returned. The soldiers agreed with Claudia's decision, but suddenly Nerra asked her to wait. According to her, the soldiers were exhausted after fighting the monsters, and it would be best to rest a little longer. Nerra asked Claudia if finding the elves was more important to her than the lives of the soldiers. The heroine said that wasn't the case, but it would become more dangerous after dark, and their food supplies were limited, so they should hurry. After listening to her, Nerra thought for a moment. Then she turned to the soldiers and asked them to be patient a little longer, promising they could rest once they reached the top. By the time the group reached the summit, it was already dark, and they stopped to rest. The soldiers couldn't believe they had actually made it to the top, as the distance had seemed insurmountable. Nerra heard them discussing the princess's support and her promise to apply herbs to their wounds the next day. The next morning, she saw Claudia busy with something in the forest. Nerra suggested they gather herbs together and thanked her for her help. However, before setting off, Claudia tied strips of cloth to the tree trunks. When asked why she was doing this, the young woman replied that it would help them find their way back if they got lost. Suddenly, Claudia told Nerra that she wanted to ask her something. She wanted to know why she had said those things yesterday, but Nerra said she didn't understand what she was talking about. Claudia clarified her question, wanting to know why Nerra had said that finding the elves was more important to her than the lives of the soldiers. The young woman replied that the soldiers had looked tired and apologized for meddling. Claudia agreed and reminded Nerra that she was the leader of the group. She asked the young woman not to create difficulties for her next time, but to follow her instructions. Nerra apologized and glanced maliciously at the marks Claudia had left. Claudia thought her sister must have felt uncomfortable with her and had gone elsewhere to gather herbs. The heroine thought perhaps she shouldn't blame her. The girl probably hadn't meant any harm. However, if it were the Nerra she knew, she would never have said those things about her attitude towards the soldiers. It seemed the question of where the real Nerra was had been answered, but the heroine wanted to observe a little longer. After gathering enough herbs and standing up from the ground, Claudia called out to her sister, shouting that they could go back, but the young woman didn't respond, and Claudia went to look for her. Unable to find Nerra, she thought perhaps she had already returned to camp. Then, the young woman noticed that the marks she had left were gone. She thought it must be the work of those notorious thieving crows. However, the heroine had a map and a compass, so finding her way wouldn't be difficult, but Nerra had nothing and the forest was very dangerous at night, so Claudia decided to call the soldiers for help. However, when she returned to camp, she suddenly found her sister safe and sound, surrounded by the soldiers. They were all happily thanking Nerra for helping them treat their wounds. As Claudia turned around, she suddenly noticed the cloth she used for marking in her sister's basket. When Nerra approached, she began to scold her for using the untreated herbs directly. She ordered the soldiers to wash off all the herbs from their wounds, as it would cause side effects within a few days. Hearing this, Nerra started yelling at Claudia, furious at her actions. She believed her sister was afraid she would steal the credit. Claudia became certain that this was definitely not the Nerra she knew and suggested they calm down and have a proper talk. The soldiers sat at the table discussing the girl's amazing cooking skills. They said she not only healed well, but also cooked perfectly. However, Luke noticed the girl was consuming more food than planned, and they couldn't return to the ship anytime soon. If he told Claudia about this, it would definitely cause another commotion, as the sisters' relationship was already strained. Finally, the group reached the place where the elves were supposed to be, the lake at the highest point of the island. Now, they were at the center, and theoretically, the sound of the moon flute could be heard from this rock. They needed to look around, but Claudia wanted to finish their conversation first. She asked Nerra what was going on. She wanted to know why the girl had left her and gone to the camp alone, taking all the markings. Claudia didn't understand why her sister would do this to her, but Nerra became nervous, unsure of how to answer. At that moment, Luke approached them and questioned Claudia about why she was treating her sister this way. Claudia asked her brother to leave, as she had something to discuss with Nerra, but he claimed to know her plan. He grabbed Nerra's hand and pulled her away from Claudia. Claudia didn't understand why he was doing this, why he was interfering in their conversation. Luke tried to shake off Claudia's hand on his shoulder, pushing her away. Claudia lost her balance and slipped towards the dangerous cliff. She stumbled and fell, but managed to grab onto a rock, shouting that she was still alive. Luke promised to save Claudia, but Nerra rushed forward first. Claudia smiled, happy that her sister wanted to help her out of danger. However, contrary to her expectations, Nerra pushed her into the abyss. Nerra watched Claudia fall, bidding her farewell forever with a smile. The knights who remained on the ship were dissatisfied with being assigned the task of restoring everything within a day. However, seeing His Highness working so diligently, they decided not to be stubborn. Nathan was looking at the map of the Espur Duchy, a place now known for its resources and diplomacy. However, more than 20 years ago, a rebellion against the Empire took place here, nearly destroying the duchy. At that time, the ministers tried to suppress the rebellion at the first sign of it, but in the end, the Emperor showed generosity and signed a peace treaty. Although they managed to maintain a long-term peaceful relationship, the current Duke, Elias Espur, had raised his sword against the Empire. While perseverance could be a great help in this matter, Nathan thought it was madness to let Claudia go to Shaco Island alone for this. Luke stared in horror at Nerra, sitting on the edge of the cliff, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. He asked her what she had done. The girl started screaming, tears streaming down her face, begging for help. According to the arriving knights, Claudia might have been swept away by the current, in which case there was almost no chance of survival. When asked what had happened, Luke started stammering. To his surprise, Nerra kept crying, saying it was an accident. According to her, Claudia had forcibly pulled her, and Luke had tried to stop them. Luke didn't understand why she was saying this, because he was trying to help, and she was the one who pushed Claudia. But Nerra insisted that Luke had pushed her sister, after which Claudia grabbed the rock but couldn't hold on and fell. Luke was speechless, astonished by how she was trying to shift the blame. Several days passed, and the ship was still anchored by the shore. Nathan stood on the deck, wondering why he hadn't received any news from the investigation team. An aide approached him, noticing that His Highness had another headache. At that moment, the lights of the returning exploration team could be seen from the depths of the island. Looking closely, Nathan couldn't understand why Claudia wasn't with the group. After learning what had happened, the prince punched Luke hard, sending him flying. Nathan yelled at him, unable to understand how he could push his own sister off a cliff. Despite Nerra claiming it was an accident, the prince immediately ordered the formation of a search party, refusing to leave the island until Claudia was found. However, the injured soldiers were now completely unable to conduct a search. According to Nerra, they were sick because of the herbs Claudia had used. Nathan didn't give her a chance to finish, announcing he would go search for her alone. He ordered the others to focus on healing and sent people to look for those with minor injuries who could recover. Despite attempts to dissuade him, worried about the dangers he might face, the prince left. The heroine lay on the ground, the waves gently lapping at her feet. Claudia regained consciousness, sitting on the beach trying to figure out where she was. She looked up at the towering rocks above, remembering Nerra pushing her off the cliff. She knew her sister hated her, of course, but she hadn't expected her to do something like this. Claudia decided to calm down and find a way back to the ship. Just as she stood up from the ground, she suddenly heard a sound. Claudia walked towards the source of the sound and was suddenly splashed with water. Opening her eyes, she saw the water spirit right in front of her, angered by her presence. Nathan searched for Claudia through the dense forest. Suddenly, he saw something flying towards him at high speed, and the next moment it crashed into his shoulder, blood splattering. Turning around, the prince saw that it was a young bat. Before he could even think about where the adult bat might be, it appeared in front of him. As expected, Claudia found the water spirit by following the sound of the moon flute. She decided to speak cautiously, stating that she had come for him, wanting to make a contract. The water spirit smiled and trapped Claudia in a bubble of water, making it difficult for her to breathe. He did this to demonstrate how weak and helpless she was, and therefore a contract was impossible. The spirit snapped his fingers and released her, telling her that a man had come to him before, and because of that man's foolishness and greed, his descendants still suffered under a curse. To make a contract and gain power, she had to prove herself worthy or she would be punished. If Claudia thought social status and wealth were enough to impress him, they were less than dust to him. The heroine thought about what else she could say besides explaining her chosen profession. She said she came from another world, with different people, culture, and language. Before coming here, she chose what she wanted to become, and she became a contractor of the spirits. The water spirit didn't understand what she was saying, but Claudia knew he could peer into human consciousness. Nathan continued to make his way across the island, trembling, trying to find the girl. Just as she suggested the spirit use his power to look into her memories, he heard a familiar voice. Clutching his injured shoulder, the prince walked towards the sound and finally found Claudia. Luke, bandaged, lay in bed, thinking about how Nathan dared to hit the future duke. He planned to tell his father and his majesty when he returned. Luke recalled Nerra's expression as she pushed Claudia off the cliff. No matter how much she disliked Claudia, it was murder, and she had put the blame on him. Luke didn't understand why she had done it, whether she was afraid of him. He decided to talk to his sister immediately and got out of bed. Nerra sat by a soldier's bedside, the soldier begging her to save them, to do something. The girl was covered in sweat, not understanding why she had to do this. She went to the kitchen to vent her frustration, destroying everything around her, while angrily asking herself how long she had to endure all this. In her opinion, the most important thing now was to reach land and treat the soldiers, not to search for someone who might already be dead after falling from such a high cliff. Nerra was angry at the soldiers who asked her for healing because she wasn't a doctor and couldn't help them. In this hysteria, Luke, who had come to talk, found her. As she turned to her brother in alarm, he demanded an explanation for what had happened. Claudia hadn't fallen immediately, and Nerra had lied, claiming she had nothing to do with her fall. According to the girl, it was because of the accumulated emotions from a difficult life. She grabbed Luke's hand, saying she was scared because lately she had been saying and doing strange things. More and more, so Nerra begged her brother to protect her. She asked if he would be on her side if something happened. The water spirit was impressed by the girl's extraordinary confidence in asking him to look into her memories. However, when he tried to look into her past, he discovered something strange. Claudia's memories, and she herself, were under special protection. This protection was bestowed upon the girl by being more powerful than the spirits, a deity. The water spirit looked at the girl in surprise, as there must be a special reason for such protection. Claudia asked him if this information was enough, reasoning that something even a god protects must be extraordinary. She believed this should be sufficient to secure an agreement. The water spirit admitted he hadn't been this happy in a long time and agreed to her request. Claudia was overjoyed, thanking him for his consent and promising to do her best. The water spirit approached her, took her hand, and kissed the back of it. A ring remained where he kissed, a bond between them. This ring couldn't be given to anyone else, and the contract would be established once Claudia named it. She decided to name the ring Elliot, then asked the spirit how to leave the island. The spirit promised to help her and, glancing behind her, asked if she needed help with the person there as well. Claudia turned to see Nathan standing nearby, unsure how much of their conversation he had overheard. She asked him what he was doing there. Noticing bloodstains, she realized Nathan was injured. She was surprised he'd managed to cross the island, infested with high-level monsters, alone to find her. Claudia wondered why he was covered in blood, then noticed his sword was also bloodstained. Nathan started to ask her something, but she interrupted. She urgently questioned why he'd come to such a dangerous place alone. Nathan countered by asking if the contract was more important to her than his life. Lately, she'd been worried about the changing light in his eyes. She didn't understand why he was looking at her like that now. Claudia turned away, begging him to stop, as the fate of the entire country rested on his shoulders. She didn't want feelings to develop between them, as she would have to leave him eventually. She told Nathan it was time to go, walking towards the water pillar the water spirit had prepared for them. The prince clutched his head again, experiencing a sharp pain. Luke stood on the deck, gazing at the water, thinking about Nerra. He wondered if the Nerra he knew was just a figment of his imagination. He suddenly thought that everything that happened to Claudia was her own fault, even wondering if he had killed his own sister. Suddenly, a knight beside him shouted, urging his master to look in the direction he was pointing. A huge water pillar formed beside the ship. Luke assumed it was another monster attack. However, the water pillar began to shrink, and two figures appeared on the deck. Hearing the commotion, Nerra ran out from the cabin to see what was happening. Just then, the water pillar disappeared, and everyone was astonished to see Nathan and Claudia return. Claudia smiled, announcing she had successfully found the water spirit. Looking at the stunned Nerra, she casually asked how she was doing. Claudia inquired about the condition of the soldiers who had suffered on the island. After learning about their symptoms, she ordered hot water to be prepared to begin treatment. The knights noticed the injured Nathan clutching his painful shoulder. Claudia quickly healed the soldiers with medicine to counteract the herb side effects. Nerra overheard the knights privately discussing that she was responsible for their ailments. Suddenly, Claudia heard the soldiers cheering that what Luke had said was a mistake. She called her brother aside to speak privately. Sitting opposite him, she couldn't understand why he was so gloomy when his sister had returned safely. She asked him why everyone was saying he pushed her off the cliff. When Luke said everything was as she'd heard, Claudia grabbed his shirt collar. He insisted that he pushed her when she forcefully grabbed Nerra. Although Claudia believed she only fell because Nerra pushed her, Luke denied it. He insisted Claudia hadn't seen anything. It was just an illusion. Despite Luke always siding with Nerra, Claudia still longed for his brotherly love. However, she couldn't understand if he was truly willing to bear the guilt of murder for this girl. Unable to comprehend how he could so readily accept this terrible crime, Claudia asked Luke how he felt when she fell. She hoped he felt remorse or at least sadness, but according to Luke, he felt nothing, as her bullying of Nerra was far worse than that act. Claudia begged him to stop, as she understood why Nerra hated her, but she didn't understand what she had done wrong to her brother. Luke had promised to always take care of her, but now he had abandoned her, and she couldn't understand why. According to him, the man didn't have a real answer to this question, and Claudia always pretended to be oblivious to all her misdeeds. It was the same when she tried to deceive everyone, but Luke was sure he understood everything from the very beginning. He begged his sister not to pretend she didn't understand what he was talking about, because she was the one who killed their mother. The Duchess, Nerra's adoptive mother, and Claudia and Luke's biological mother, died in an accident before the start of the game. The protagonist didn't understand what her brother was talking about and asked him to be more specific, although he thought she was playing dumb again. Luke recounted how their mother fell down the stairs and was definitely pushed, although the culprit was never found. Shortly after the incident, Nerra came to him and told him she saw Claudia arguing with their mother before the tragedy. As proof, she brought Claudia's favorite necklace, which was found at the scene. In Luke's eyes, Claudia became the prime suspect, but Nerra begged him to cover for his sister so that their family wouldn't suffer anymore. However, now the boy regretted it, because she had changed from a kind sister into a terrible villain, and it might have been better if she had received the punishment she deserved back then. In response, Claudia considered this evidence to be baseless accusations. She didn't understand how Luke could believe the words of his half-sister and potentially fabricated evidence. Claudia tearfully asked him how he could blame her for their mother's death. After all, they were blood relatives, and yet Luke betrayed his own sister, painting her as an immoral monster who killed their own mother. The attendant brought Nathan the strongest painkillers he could find. He didn't understand why the pains that had stopped tormenting him after he grew up were returning. Although Nathan asked him not to worry, the attendant knew it was one of the symptoms of the hereditary curse. He believed the prince needed to return to the palace as soon as possible. The protagonist hugged her knees and cried. She couldn't believe Luke actually thought she killed their mother. She felt sorry for Claudia, having to endure accusations from everyone, even her own brother. Nerra deliberately gave false testimony, not wanting the girl to remain innocent. Besides Nerra, no one else witnessed the argument between Claudia and the Duchess, and she definitely played a significant role in this matter. The protagonist couldn't just leave it like this, because if the girl was innocent, she was the only one who could prove it. The Duke greeted the ship returning from its voyage, overjoyed at the return of his daughter, for whom he had been worried. Claudia asked her father to restrain his emotions, as everyone was watching them. When her father inquired about the prince's whereabouts, the girl explained that he wasn't feeling well and had already returned directly to the palace. The protagonist was saddened that Nathan left as soon as they landed, without even saying a word to her. Claudia asked her father not to go home immediately, but to talk first. The Duke guessed it was clearly going to be a difficult conversation. Since it was a rare occasion for his daughter to proactively ask for his time, they sat down at a cafe. The Duke asked if this conversation was related to the prince, or if there were some unfair accusations. Claudia asked if he was referring to Nerra when he said unfair accusations. According to the Duke, he had only heard such complaints about his sister from his daughter. Realizing that Claudia must have opened her heart to her father, the protagonist asked what he thought of Nerra. They had lived together for a long time, so she wanted to know his opinion as a family member. The Duke himself knew they had never been close sisters, and Claudia wanted to know what kind of daughter she was to him. Rebellos was reluctant to talk about Nerra, so his daughter directly asked if there was a connection between their mother's death and the girl. Seeing her father's expression change at this question, she assumed he was hiding something and demanded he tell her. When he asked why Claudia was suddenly asking about this, the girl replied that she had suspicions. She talked about the misunderstanding with Luke and how Nerra made her brother think she did it. Claudia felt deeply hurt and wanted to resolve this issue as soon as possible. The Duke's hands trembled with anger at his son's actions, and he pleaded with her to listen to him. Her father knew that Claudia's relationship with Nerra, whom he also considered a daughter, was far from ideal. The Duke also knew about their arguments over His Highness, but he believed they would become friends sooner or later. However, the protagonist pointed out that she wasn't asking this question to learn about these obvious things. Suddenly, the Duke declared that Nerra did indeed have a terrifying dark side. He had seen the girl inexplicably laughing at the Duchess's funeral, although he might have thought it was due to her severe. However, her father had nothing more to say to Claudia, as he was sure his wife's death was an accident. The protagonist called Elliot to apologize, as she didn't want to bother him again. The girl needed his help with something that was bothering her, as a lot of time had passed since the incident, and she had no concrete evidence. According to Elliot, everything was as Claudia thought, and he showed her the Duchess's last memories. In this memory, Nerra sat next to her mother, saying that she should hurry up and get up. Then she grabbed the Duchess's hand, saying with a smile that she was holding on tight and should push harder. Claudia grabbed the wall in horror to keep from falling. The girl had tried her best to believe that Nerra was good, but she turned out to be a demonic maid. Mary brought the maids to see the protagonist, telling them everything they knew, not daring to lie. Having learned the truth about the Duchess's case, the protagonist began to suspect that Claudia had received the villainous label entirely because of Nerra. Now, one of the maids tearfully recounted how she accidentally burned Nerra's back while combing her hair. Nerra promised to forgive her everything if she said Claudia had ordered her to do it. According to Nerra, besides the burn marks, she had many other scars caused by her sister. Although the maid hadn't seen these scars with her own eyes, she believed Nerra because of the rumors about the protagonist. Thus, through Mary and Elliot, Claudia's memories of her past life were somewhat replenished. The girl had finished all her business at the manor, and the carriage was waiting at the entrance. The Duke entered the room and asked when his daughter would visit again. Claudia said it wouldn't be soon, as she planned to see the Emperor and then go in search of another spirit. The more spirits, the better, as this way they could end the war faster. The Duke, holding his daughter's hand, asked her to be careful and always remember that she still had him. Her father told Claudia again that he would always be on her side, and the girl smiled, feeling a father's love for the first time. Leaving the manor, the protagonist sensed several girls behind her. They had run away when they saw her before, but now they hesitantly handed her a letter and ran off. The maids, embarrassed to stand near her, decided to express their feelings through a letter. Thanks to the protagonist's support, they were educated and developed at night school. Therefore, they thanked Claudia for giving them the opportunity to go out into the world. Nerra sat opposite Duke Rebello, and the Duke noticed her unhealthy complexion. The girl was very worried, not understanding why her father had called her and whether he might have found out about what happened on the island. She reassured herself, planning to make Claudia look like a liar if anything happened. But just then, the Duke announced to Nerra his intention to send her to the Imperial Academy. After all, if a girl was to become empress, she should receive the appropriate education. Although Nerra was too young for the academy, her current reputation was enough to get her enrolled. In fact, during the conversation with her father, Claudia had suggested sending her sister to study. At first, the Duke didn't understand why his daughter would make such a suggestion, since she herself had said that Nerra had tried to kill her on the island. Although her father knew about this and offered to send the girl away, Claudia believed they couldn't do so without clear evidence. The Imperial Academy was located on an island far from here, so they decided to send Nerra there, so she wouldn't be an eyesore. Luke looked out the window, thinking about how Claudia had ignored him after her return and now had left without saying goodbye. Remembering his last conversation with his sister, he suddenly began to wonder if he had really been wrong. Suddenly, the door behind him opened, and Claudia entered the room. Contrary to Luke's expectations, the girl decided to say goodbye to him after all. Claudia wished her brother all the best and advised him to take care of his only sister. Finally, she declared that she had nothing to do with her mother's death, but if he still thought so, then let him remain near his loyal lapdog. The protagonist said she no longer cared whether he believed her or not, and just then, Elliot appeared in the room. He stood between the siblings, forbidding Luke to approach the girl. Nerra found the decision to send her to the academy strange, and she worried that Claudia would tell their father everything. A maid entered the room and gave the girl a letter from the prince. In addition to the letter, His Highness had ordered a gift to be delivered to Nerra, and the maid handed her the box. The girl opened the box and found a ring inside, which she immediately put on her finger. In her opinion, the prince must have been eager to propose to her. Through the letter, Nerra believed her father had known about this all along, which was why he sent her to the academy and was pleased she would become the empress instead of Claudia. Luke entered the room. He had much to discuss with Nerra, as their conversation on the island remained unfinished. The young woman smiled because her brother had helped her achieve everything she had now. According to Luke, Claudia had told him something before leaving that worried him, and he wanted to ask about it. But since Nerra had already received her father's approval and the prince's proposal, she no longer needed her brother, so she replied that she had nothing more to say to him. According to the doctor, Nathan's life was not in danger, but his body was still weak, and His Highness needed rest. Apparently, the curse could not be avoided, and although the doctor believed His Highness would overcome it, it was too early to draw conclusions, as the same symptoms had not yet manifested. After a while, the prince regained his strength and picked up his sword again. His daily life returned to normal, but his mind was filled with everything he had seen. On the island, Claudia's conversation with the spirit about her being under divine protection seemed very strange to Nathan. He also remembered her anger at him for crossing the dangerous island alone to chase after her. Nathan himself didn't know why he risked his life to save her. Lately, he had often been surprised by his own actions, unaware of the reasons behind them. The prince hoped Claudia could help him answer this question. Claudia had arrived at the imperial palace, and a lot of work awaited her. After revealing Elliot's existence, preparations for war needed to begin immediately, but first, the spirit's power needed to be studied. Claudia was glad to have a trustworthy commander by her side. Thinking of him, the young woman regretted never thanking him for coming to save her. Now she was ashamed of her behavior, as Nathan had probably come out of concern. Just as she was thinking about apologizing the next time they met, the prince came out to greet her. Claudia bowed in greeting to His Highness, but he urged her to hurry and turned to let her follow. Following Nathan, Claudia thought he must be angry with her. Suddenly, he stopped and extended his hand to her. He said that feeling unwell was no excuse for neglecting his fiancée. Claudia smiled, and then they walked hand in hand down the hallway. Nathan and Claudia entered the throne room hand in hand to see the Emperor. Claudia said that thanks to His Majesty's blessing, they had returned safely and brought good news. When Claudia looked up, she suddenly noticed the commanders in the hall. When she asked why they were all there, the Emperor told them there was an emergency. The Empire had been unexpectedly attacked, which surprised Claudia, as it had happened so quickly. Regis asked his father to entrust the matter to him, promising to bring back the enemy's head and the banner of victory. Claudia worried that the Emperor would agree, as this would bring Regis one step closer to the throne. Therefore, she indicated to His Majesty that she had something to report. The prince was angered by the rude young woman who interrupted him, but Claudia needed to inform the Emperor about the Empire's new advantage. Claudia raised her hand, which wore the ring, and summoned Elliot. A sphere of water formed around them, preventing the commanders from approaching. Claudia recounted how she had found the spirit and made a pact with him, so that his power could help the Empire. She explained that she couldn't demonstrate his full power indoors, but the Emperor didn't seem to be listening. Suddenly, he shouted, ordering the abominable thing to be eliminated immediately. The Emperor ordered the princess to leave and asked Nathan if he was mad. His Majesty questioned whether his son had forgotten who had cursed the royal family. Claudia looked at Nathan in surprise, finding it hard to believe that his family had been cursed by a spirit. The prince asked his father not to worry, as he himself had seen the curse weakening. Furthermore, he trusted Claudia's wisdom and prudence, believing that even such a dangerous power could not harm her. Despite this, the Emperor ordered Claudia to get rid of the spirit immediately and send it back where it came from. After leaving the throne room, Nathan apologized, saying he never thought it would turn out this way. He had hoped to make his father forget about the curse, at least for a while. He believed they needed a little more time, and even if they hadn't succeeded today, they would surely succeed next time. But Claudia disagreed, saying it was time for her to leave. She prepared to depart. According to Claudia, she needed to immediately search for a second spirit. The conversation with the Emperor had made her think that the curse might not be the result, but the spirit itself might be the cause. If her assumption was correct, then finding the second spirit wouldn't be difficult following this logic. Claudia might have already found two spirits, Elliot and the one who cursed the royal family. The young woman needed to move steadily towards her goal. She still had a lot to do. She was about to summon Elliot, but Nathan ordered Claudia to stop. When the young woman stopped and turned around, Nathan asked her what she was doing. Claudia suggested the prince tell his father that she was returning the spirit. However, according to him, that wasn't the case. He demanded an explanation as to why the young woman always acted so selfishly. Although Nathan had already asked this question, he repeated it, wondering if their contract was more precious than life itself to her. That day, he didn't have time to think about such trifles. All he wanted to do was save Claudia. These worries still hadn't left him. He couldn't rest easy, and yet she was so recklessly risking her life. Nathan didn't understand why she had once again left alone, not relying on anyone. The prince asked what he was to her, if he was merely a contract partner. Claudia apologized, saying she didn't have much time, every minute was precious, and turned to leave. Nathan tried to stop the young woman, grabbing her arm, but she broke free. The prince was about to run after her, but fell to his knees, unable to move due to a sharp pain. Regis watched all this from around the corner with a sinister smile. High splashes of water rose, startling the birds perched by the sea. Elliot announced his arrival to Claudia with a sharp voice. They arrived at the Saluna Plains, where, according to him, the fire spirit lived. When the protagonist asked if the two spirits were close, Elliot denied it. The fire spirit himself had told him this, although he hadn't wanted to know. Despite this, Claudia was very grateful for his help and now asked him to summon the spirit before her. Despite knowing that the other party was hot-tempered, cruel, and dangerous, she was determined to see him again. Elliot, surprised by the young woman's stubbornness, promised to see her later and left. The surroundings suddenly began to burn, and the fire spirit appeared on the plain. He looked around, asking if the water spirit was here, threatening to burn Claudia to ashes if he didn't show up. He set her dress on fire. Nathan lay in bed, screaming in pain as 3 doctors tried to restrain him. The prince's attendant asked why his condition had worsened, but the doctors themselves didn't understand what was happening. Nathan gritted his teeth, telling it to leave his body. The fire spirit demanded the water spirit appear, or he would burn Claudia to ashes. Elliot appeared before him, noting that he hadn't changed a bit, his personality as bad as ever. The fire spirit grabbed him by the collar of his coat, angrily demanding to know why he wouldn't let him onto his island. As expected, he was indeed hot-tempered. Claudia decided to intervene, explaining that it was she who had asked Elliot to bring her here. The fire spirit didn't understand what a mortal could want from him. The protagonist introduced herself and told him about her agreement with the water spirit. According to her, she had come to formally request a contract with him. Hearing this, he blasted them with flames again, but Elliot protected the young woman in time. The fire spirit saw no point in making a contract with a mortal who would turn to ash with a single touch. He didn't understand how the water spirit could make a contract with a mortal and suggested they leave before he tore them to pieces. Claudia said he misunderstood the situation, as the contract terms were equal for everyone. There would be no master or servant between them. The fire spirit didn't believe her and blasted the young woman with flames again, but Elliot saved her by trapping her in a water bubble. His patience worn thin, he told the fire spirit to stop for the last time. Hearing the young woman tell Elliot to calm down, he decided to show mercy and give them a chance. The spirit was willing to make a contract with Claudia, but in return, she had to sacrifice someone she loved to him within 30 days. However, if the fire spirit didn't get what he wanted after this time, she herself would become his sacrifice. In principle, the protagonist understood perfectly well that this wouldn't be without its difficulties, and so she agreed. But Claudia also had a condition. As a trial version of their contract, the fire spirit had to stay with her all this time. He agreed to her proposal, saying he just needed to talk to the water spirit about something. Elliot asked the young woman if she was sure she wanted to do this, because if she didn't sacrifice someone close to her, she would have to say goodbye to her life. However, Claudia didn't intend to put anyone in danger. During this 1-month deadline, she had other plans. She intended to gain the fire spirit's favor and force him into a full contract with her. As Claudia left, she realized she had no other choice but to see this plan through. Back at the palace, Claudia was grateful that the fire spirit had given her some time, as the war with the duchy was imminent. Although she had promised to ensure the empire's victory, the young woman worried whether it was truly possible. A sense of foreboding continued to haunt her, and Claudia wondered if she had done the right thing. As for Nathan, she had truly tried not to mix promises with feelings, but in the end, she couldn't and had hurt him deeply. Claudia decided they needed some time apart, as her mind was in turmoil. Walking up the stairs, she heard someone call her name. Turning around, she saw Regis standing downstairs with a smile on his face, accompanied by several knights. He greeted Claudia and asked how she was doing, but then said there was no need to answer and got straight to the point. He snapped his fingers, and the knights immediately seized the young woman's arms. Standing behind the iron bars, Claudia demanded to know what the prince meant by this and asked to be released immediately. Regis walked into the cell, not understanding why she was making such a fuss. Claudia couldn't believe the prince dared to be so insolent. Regis called her a brazen woman for defying the emperor's orders and pretending to be an innocent victim. Although Claudia denied it, the prince advised her to stop making excuses, as he had overheard her conversation with Nathan, including her plans to seek out the second spirit. Claudia couldn't understand how he could have overheard their conversation and insisted on summoning Nathan immediately. According to Regis, her brother didn't care about her at all now, since she was the one who left him first and was now making a scene demanding to see him. Claudia insisted she hadn't left Nathan and would never do so. Regis said that right after she left, the curse struck her brother. He collapsed and was now suffering in his room. Claudia was shocked by the news and couldn't understand how this could have happened to Nathan. She was surprised that His Highness's condition had worsened, as she thought he had recovered from his illness. According to Regis, things weren't as simple as she thought, and her brother's worsening condition was likely due to her leaving him. If Claudia had known the prince was so unwell, she would never have treated him that way, and should have at least tried to explain things to him. Regis said no one would help Claudia now, and her fate rested entirely with the emperor. He ordered her to wait quietly for His Majesty's decision and then left the cell. Claudia blamed herself for acting rashly without considering the consequences and didn't know what to do. After a while, the emperor came to her cell and demanded an explanation. Kneeling before him, Claudia said she deserved to die, but she hadn't intended to offend His Majesty. She had only defied his orders because she wholeheartedly wanted to save the empire. Claudia understood that she was unforgivable, but she was certain that the spirit's power could help them win the war. She pleaded with the emperor to believe her, and that she would prove herself right. Claudia was sure she would bring His Majesty good news. Suddenly, the emperor said she reminded him of her father. According to him, the Duke always had the same determination in his eyes when he was young. Before Claudia was born, the Duke was a truly great knight, never hesitating to charge into battle. Even when the outcome of a battle seemed predetermined, Rubelov always managed to snatch victory from his opponents. But it was during one of these fierce battles that the Duke, in order to protect the Emperor's life, lost an eye. The Emperor knelt before Claudia and admitted he couldn't punish someone so much like her father. He took her hand and promised not to ask her to relinquish the power she had gained, but implored her not to use it under any circumstances. Claudia silently asked for his forgiveness, as she had to make contracts with all the spirits to return to her own world. A week later, Regis was still heading to the front lines. Watching him, Claudia was surprised to see so much joy in the prince's eyes, as if he had forgotten he was going to war. She genuinely couldn't understand why she would ever fall for such an idiot. The emperor approached Claudia and said he had something to discuss with her. He asked if she spoke any foreign languages. This conversation felt familiar to Claudia. She recalled that this was precisely how the previous mission to receive the delegation had begun. She asked the emperor if a delegation from the kingdom of Silt was arriving, and to his confusion, explained that she had overheard the servants discussing it. The emperor confirmed that she had understood correctly, and therefore, he wanted to entrust her with escorting the first princess. Claudia said she wasn't very familiar with Silt, but since she and the princess were of similar age, they would surely get along well. Claudia knew that if she could give the princess a proper reception, the princess would gratefully cast a spell, permanently increasing all of the character's attributes, so she should try her luck. Arriving outside Nathan's room, Claudia asked the servant why, after 7 days, she still wasn't allowed to see him. The servant apologized, explaining that the healers had requested that His Highness not be disturbed for the time being. Claudia couldn't help but wonder if the prince's condition was truly so dire that she wasn't allowed to visit him for such a long time. Leaving his door, Claudia had already begun to doubt his illness, suspecting that he might simply not want to see her. As she descended the stairs, a man watched her from the prince's window. The man stepped away from the window and, addressing Nathan's reflection in the mirror, remarked that the person he had chosen was beautiful. He then approached the mirror and asked the prince what the girl's name was. Nathan trembled with rage, forbidding him to utter his future wife's name with his filthy mouth. The man laughed at this, as they shared the same lips, as if they were one, meaning they also shared a wife. Furthermore, he couldn't wait to see the prince finally married. He had already envisioned the girl in this room. Claudia donned her cloak and looked around, hoping no one was nearby. Claudia wasn't sure if she could succeed, but she wanted to confirm everything, so she asked Elliot to help her. Nathan's room was on the 2nd floor, and with the water spirit's help, she climbed onto his balcony. She entered his room and approached the prince's sleeping form. She was glad to see that he looked well. Apparently, insomnia hadn't been troubling him. Of course, Claudia would have been more at ease if she could speak with him, but she decided not to disturb his sleep. Just as she was about to leave the room, she suddenly heard Nathan's voice from behind her. He asked who was there, sitting up and demanding to know who dared enter his chambers without permission. Claudia apologized for her intrusion, explaining that she had come to see him because she couldn't quell her worries. Nathan got out of bed, a strange light flickering in his eyes. He addressed her as his precious wife and kissed her hand. When asked how he was feeling, Claudia replied that he looked well, as she had been worried his condition was grave. However, Claudia had a strange feeling, as if the atmosphere in the room had somehow changed. Now that she knew Nathan was better, she intended to return. But the prince grabbed Claudia's hand, not wanting to let her go so soon. She looked at him in surprise, saying that it was already late. However, Nathan pressed her against the wall, telling her not to worry about his health and to talk to him. He leaned closer to her lips, suggesting a kiss instead of conversation. But Claudia suddenly pushed the prince away, demanding that he stop. The same sinister light in his eyes, the prince asked why she was pushing away her husband. Looking at him, Claudia realized that this wasn't the Nathan she knew. This person was completely different. She didn't understand where he had gone. At this point, Nathan continued to hold Claudia against the wall, asking why she was looking at him with such a strange expression. He yelled that he was the first prince of the Balkani's empire, and she belonged to him. Suddenly, he clutched his head, demanding an end to the futile resistance, as this body no longer belonged to him. With that, Nathan collapsed at Claudia's feet. He continued to hold his head, begging her to flee as quickly as possible. After a while, the prince finally calmed down, and Claudia managed to help him back to bed. Sitting beside him, Claudia tried to understand what had just happened, as she was certain that wasn't Nathan who had just spoken. Suddenly, the prince opened his eyes, looking in surprise at Claudia, who was startled by his sudden awakening. Nathan cupped Claudia's face in his hands, asking if she was all right. After confirming that she wasn't hurt, he released her and apologized for his behavior. Looking at him, Claudia asked if this was a manifestation of his illness. She was certain that hadn't been him, but didn't understand how it was possible. Nathan said he didn't want to talk about it, and that their last encounter had made him realize he didn't have to tell her every detail of his life. However, he was still interested in what it meant to be chosen by God. He happened to witness them discussing something similar before they made a contract with the spirit. Claudia hadn't explained anything to the prince because she hadn't found the right moment. The heroine claimed it was complete nonsense, and her conversation with Elliot was completely irrelevant. However, the prince also heard her mention that she was from another world, and he couldn't ignore this information. Claudia remained silent, and Nathan sarcastically remarked that he'd forgotten they were just partners, and questions were completely unnecessary here. He asked the girl if she had anything else to tell him, but she said no. Nathan wondered why she was still sitting there in that case. After a short silence, the heroine admitted that she came to the prince because she wanted to see him. Deciding it was time to leave, the girl stood up and walked towards the door. Nathan blushed, covering his mouth with his hand, and silently watched her go. After leaving the room, the heroine stood at the door for a while, pondering why her heart felt so heavy. A few days later, a delegation from the kingdom of Silt arrived at the imperial palace. This country bordered the Balkani's empire and the Aspur duchy. The delegation needed to be received with great ceremony, as the outcome of the impending war depended on this country to some extent. Recently, relations between the kingdom and the empire had deteriorated due to conflicts over immigration laws. The empire built houses for immigrants, but the Silt authorities opposed the new law and refused to pay compensation, leading to very tense relations between the two countries. The emperor greeted the prince, who said the journey hadn't tired him, as the thought of meeting his majesty filled him with joy. Claudia tried to find the princess among the guests, as she had agreed to this venture, hoping to obtain some information from her. The prince, smiling, introduced his sister, Elena, dressed in knight's armor, to the emperor. The princess removed her helmet and greeted the emperor, who was surprised by how much she had changed since their last meeting. His Majesty introduced Elena to Claudia, his eldest son's future wife, and asked the heroine to show the princess around the palace. The girl stared in surprise at the imposing princess, unable to look away. While escorting Elena, Claudia worried that her plans were ruined, as she hadn't expected to see such a princess. The heroine had envisioned a graceful young lady, so she had planned a tea party, a stroll through boutiques, and a romantic play. But now the girl doubted the princess would enjoy these activities. Elena asked the translator to inquire what Claudia planned to do next, and the heroine asked a maid to ask the princess what she herself wanted to do. Elena said she was tired from the long journey, so Claudia suggested taking her to the hot springs. However, to her surprise, the princess wanted to go hunting to stretch her legs. Claudia changed into more comfortable clothes suitable for hunting. She was visibly nervous, as the princess had asked Claudia to accompany her on the hunt. While trying to mount her horse, the heroine wondered what to do, as they couldn't even communicate properly. Suddenly, Elena addressed her in the imperial language, offering assistance, which greatly surprised Claudia. To her confusion, the girl explained that she considered it impolite to dismiss the translator sent to help. Upon reaching the forest and noticing a rabbit hopping in the grass, the heroine began to panic, as she had never hunted before. Elena approached Claudia and asked why she was trembling with fear. The princess promised to catch the rabbit for the girl and drew her bowstring. However, at that moment, the rabbit ran to the edge of the bushes where 3 little rabbits peeked out. Claudia begged the princess to stop, standing in front of the bow, an arrow to prevent her from shooting the harmless rabbit family. To explain her impulse, she said there was a belief that killing an animal with its young would bring misfortune. She said there were other ways to enjoy nature, such as climbing a mountain to admire the scenery. However, the heroine hadn't expected to be so weak that Elena had to carry her half the way. She apologized for not properly assessing her physical strength when suggesting the climb. However, the girl soon reached a beautiful spot overlooking the imperial palace. Elena was surprised by Claudia's delight, as if she were seeing the palace for the first time, but she explained that it was because she spent most of her time in her own territory. The princess had heard that Duke Rebellus was the greatest warrior of the empire, but his daughter hadn't followed in her father's footsteps at all. According to Claudia, she was often ill as a child, and although her health no longer bothered her, it sometimes caused inconvenience. Elena guessed that perhaps the girl was simply afraid to stain her noble hands with blood. According to her, people are always drawn to the glamorous and avoid the unsightly. But in her opinion, a beautiful exterior wasn't nearly enough. From up high, the brightest area appeared to be Svedia, a small residential area planned specifically for immigrants. But in the darkest place down the Weir River, in the slums, those expelled from Svedia were forced to live. According to Elena, the kingdom of Silt was once founded by a slum dweller, and with this in mind, they always took care of the poor. Among the immigrants who settled in Svedia, you could find people from Syria, but the empire didn't care about their history at all. She asked Claudia if she knew how those driven out of Svedia were living. They had no normal place to sleep, were forced to drink rotten river water, and lived a miserable life. Claudia inquired whether those people had settled near the Weir River. She asked Elena if she knew where the exiles lived. After a while, the 2 girls mounted their horses and descended to the lower reaches of the river. Looking at the orphans sitting on the ground, Claudia found it hard to believe that people were forced to live in such nightmarish conditions. According to Elena, the orphanages run by the church had also been closed, and now these children had nowhere to go. The protagonist dismounted her horse and approached the grieving children. The princess watched Claudia intently, trying to understand what she was doing. Suddenly, the girl moved closer and hugged 2 of the children tightly. The protagonist went to see the emperor, but he was angered by her request to improve another area, as too much money had already been spent on the construction of Svedia. His Majesty was very surprised when Claudia said that the first king of Silt came from the slums. The rulers of Silt hadn't forgotten their history and had always supported the weak, but due to the city's reconstruction, many poor people had lost their homes. I particularly sympathize with the children who are completely unable to take care of themselves. It's cruel of the empire to deprive them of their homes. Claudia fully understood their feelings, as she had once experienced something similar. According to her, some things always needed to be sacrificed for a greater purpose. Correcting past mistakes would help strengthen relations with the kingdom of Silt, which could support the empire in war. The protagonist successfully persuaded the emperor, who abandoned the idea of reconstruction, and she and Elena said about implementing the project. The work was completed faster than expected, and although it was temporary, they managed to resettle the poor back in Svedia. Elena thanked Claudia. Without her help, she couldn't have completed this task so quickly. The princess was surprised, as she hadn't expected the girl to be able to persuade. The emperor, according to the protagonist, His Majesty was deeply moved by the kingdom of Silt's philosophy of supporting the weak and helpless. As Claudia prepared to leave, she asked Elena what she wanted to do before she left. After a moment of thought, the princess replied that she would be happy if they could become friends. Elena had practiced swordsmanship since childhood, and because of her stern character and intimidating appearance, everyone avoided her. However, Claudia wasn't frightened by the princess's habits and did everything for her comfort, so the princess offered to become her friend. The protagonist found this confession touching and readily agreed to the proposal. Elena said with a serious face that she had heard that true friends always help each other. The princess had shared her problems with Claudia, and now it was her turn to do the same. In fact, the girl did have something to tell her new friend, and it concerned her relationship with Prince Nathan. Not wanting to talk directly about herself, Claudia said that an acquaintance of hers was in a difficult situation. Recently, she had met a man who was clearly not indifferent to her. According to Claudia, he was a nobleman who had saved the girl's life more than once. However, she would be leaving soon, so she tried not to get too attached to him, and he was hurt by her behavior. Recently, their relationship had become strained, and the girl wanted to resolve the conflict but didn't know how. After a moment of thought, Elena asked if the acquaintance she was talking about liked the man. The princess believed this was the most important question because otherwise, it was better to keep their distance from each other. Claudia shyly replied that the girl was not indifferent to the man. In Elena's opinion, in this situation, it was best to be frank and honestly explain the reason for her coldness. After all, even if they eventually parted ways, it was important to do everything possible to leave only good memories. It was time to say goodbye, as the Silt delegation was leaving the Empire tomorrow. Elena, having become Claudia's first friend in this world, decided to do everything she could to make their parting memories warm and happy. The girls finally managed to go for a walk and visit the Empire Market. Claudia urged Elena along, as the performance was about to begin, but Elena wasn't in a hurry and walked over to a stall. There she bought a skewer of frogs and invited Claudia to try this unusual delicacy with her. Claudia, frightened by the idea of eating frogs, ran away from her friend, laughing. Claudia enjoyed spending time with Elena, as she couldn't remember the last time she had laughed so carefree. In fact, there was another person in this world who cared about Claudia's fate. She intended to find a way to thank Nathan. During the farewell for the delegation, the Emperor announced that the situation had been successfully resolved and the immigrants would arrive next month. His Majesty thanked Prince Nathan and Princess Elena for visiting the Empire. The princess inquired about Claudia's whereabouts, but the Emperor himself was unsure, as she had intended to see them off, but was inexplicably late. At that moment, Claudia came running, apologizing for her tardiness. She handed a box to the princess, asking her to accept a small gift. She remembered Elena mentioning wanting to bring back a souvenir from Belcani's for her mother. While they were walking through the market, she said she wanted to please her mother, but worried that it wouldn't be easy. According to Elena, her mother was very picky, demanding, and difficult to please. Claudia had visited the largest jewelry exhibition today, where there was a huge crowd practically fighting over the jewels. She whispered to Elena that if Her Majesty the Queen didn't like the gift, she could blame Claudia. Claudia could have entrusted this task to a servant, but she went to the exhibition herself, a noble gesture worthy of the princess's appreciation. Elena always felt like she was only receiving gifts and never giving any in return, and she didn't want to appear ungrateful. Therefore, she decided to give something to Claudia. Taking her hand, she kissed Claudia's wrist. At the spot where she was kissed, Claudia saw the emblem of the Silt Kingdom. According to Elena, this magic could only be used by members of the royal family, and only once in their lifetime. She asked Claudia to remember this gift in times of danger, whether for Claudia herself or for Elena. Claudia embraced the princess, thanking her for such a precious gift. Before leaving, Elena promised to write to Claudia. In the original story, this meeting was just a small task, but they had truly become close. They had even become friends. Lying in bed, Claudia realized she was wrong. She had thought the world she was currently in was just a false world. However, Nathan was also a real person, but even knowing his feelings, she had been avoiding meeting him. Claudia jumped out of bed, determined to see the prince and explain everything. She should talk to him about herself and about the person she had seen in him that day. Approaching the door, Claudia heard some noise and commotion outside. She left her room and asked a servant what was happening in the palace. According to him, there was an emergency, and His Majesty had ordered everyone to be assembled. The vanguard troops, commanded by His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince, were in a very difficult situation. Meanwhile, Luke was walking along the corridors of the Rebello mansion. Nerra walked towards him, but as he was about to greet her, she indifferently passed him by. Turning to watch the girl walk away, Luke wondered why she was acting this way. Claudia had said that Nerra had been spreading rumors about her, and now Luke wanted to find out what had really happened on Shaco Island. However, the girl continued to ignore him, not responding even when he tried to start conversation. But Luke wouldn't tolerate this behavior any longer, so he caught up to Nerra. He grabbed her hand to stop her, his actions startling the girl. Luke pulled her along, saying they needed to talk. Despite her pleas to let go, saying he was hurting her, her boyfriend ordered her to shut up and come with him. Luke asked his sister why she was treating him this way, not greeting him and ignoring his words. According to Nerra, she thought he would always be on her side, but after talking to his sister, he suddenly started accusing her. She thought he wasn't the person she knew anymore, but Luke asked if she had considered his position. He demanded she recall what happened on Shaco Island. Nerra asked if this was all because of the incident where he pushed his sister off the cliff. According to her, she couldn't forget what she had witnessed, and even though they were relatives, she couldn't stay silent about it. Nerra asked her brother if he wanted to hold her responsible. Luke, holding his head in his hands in disbelief, grabbed the girl's shoulders and asked her what was wrong, since she was clearly the one at fault. Looking him straight in the eyes, she asked how he could say such a thing, deeming it absurd. Nerra told her brother that Prince Regis had recently proposed to her. This meant she would soon be the real queen, so she patted her brother on the shoulder, advising him to control himself for the sake of his own future. Luke went to the maids, who showed him one of their legs scalded with boiling water. The other maids told him how they had unknowingly spread the rumors about Claudia. The girls assured him they had no choice. They needed to find a way to survive. But according to them, the real villain was Nerra. Luke had a feeling that things with Nerra weren't so simple, but he couldn't understand Claudia's words about her being involved in their mother's death. He had always been sure that Nerra loved the Duchess very much. When she was on her deathbed, the girl rushed into the room, begging her to recover. However, her mother looked at her with vacant, tear-filled eyes and passed away without saying a word. Luke remembered that look, realizing with dread that it might be true. The maids gathered in the hallway, shared their worries, fearing that the Empire might truly fall. They said that Prince Nathan should have arrived by now. Claudia overheard their conversation. She believed everything would collapse soon, but if Nathan could seize the opportunity to change the outcome, the title of Crown Prince would be his. However, in his current state, he couldn't participate in the war, so the girl needed to take action herself. She had to accomplish a feat that surpassed Regis's achievements, and this was also the only chance to prove the power of the elves. Entering the prince's room, she found him lying on the floor in agony. As she helped him to bed, she realized that Nathan wasn't just sick, but must be fighting a curse. He had to hide this, because if people knew he couldn't touch women, the whole country would rebel. The royal family's curse came from the elves, which meant the key to lifting the curse was also related to the elves. To return to her world and free Nathan from his suffering, Claudia needed to find the elves as soon as possible. Dawn had already broken outside the window. The girl rose from the chair and walked towards the prince. She apologized to him, as she didn't want to leave without saying goodbye again. Everything around Nathan was dark. He heard a voice calling to him, saying he was truly strong, unlike the other members of the royal family. This voice had waited for over 10 years, and when it appeared, it was locked away again. He was surprised by this, saying he couldn't go on like this anymore. Nathan saw a girl in a cloak with a hood over her head apologizing to him. She said she didn't want to leave like that again without saying goodbye. The prince didn't understand who was in front of him, but after looking closely, he was surprised to recognize the girl as Stella. The day for Nerra to leave for the Imperial Academy finally arrived. The Duke wondered if this was truly the right decision. An aide handed Rebello a letter from the Emperor. The Duke told Claudia that His Majesty had ordered him to stop her if she tried to do anything reckless. In his opinion, the Emperor must have thought she would act alongside the Rebello family knights. The Duke reminded his daughter that she was now defying His Majesty's will. After all, even if Claudia succeeded, the Emperor wouldn't be pleased and she might be punished. According to the girl, His Majesty was a magnanimous person. He even forgave the rebellious Espia Duchy. Since the Emperor knew the taste of defeat better than anyone, Claudia believed that if she won, she would be forgiven. The Duke asked his daughter what she thought about Nerra having already left for the Imperial Academy before her arrival. Now that girl would receive a better education in the Empire and live a peaceful life, while Claudia was going to the battlefield, even though she didn't know what war was. According to him, the girl wanted to go to hell, where people suffered from lack of water, and the air was filled with the stench of rotting corpses. Claudia believed her actions were right, but now she felt it was even more difficult. After a moment of thought, she stood up from the table, and the Duke looked at his daughter in surprise. Suddenly, the girl walked towards her father and hugged him tightly. Although he was angry with her, Claudia realized he was trying to care for her. However, according to her, she was her father's daughter, the daughter of the Empire's greatest hero, so the girl asked the Duke to believe in her at least once. After a brief silence, her father asked who else it could be if not her. Claudia smiled. However, the Duke had one condition. Her brother had to go to the battlefield with her. According to him, Luke made this decision, which greatly surprised his father. Luke personally came to him and expressed his desire to go with Claudia. He said that for many years he had wrongly viewed his sister, believing only Nerra's words. But now Luke realized his beliefs were mistaken. Therefore, he asked his father to allow him to fulfill his duties as an older brother at least this once. The Duke said, considering their recent events, he understood Claudia's feelings. He then took out a box containing 2 pendants from his pocket, which the Duchess had left for Claudia and Luke. The Duke asked his daughter to take out the pendants. On the back of the pendants was engraved, "A lone tree is fragile even in a gentle breeze. Only trees with intertwined roots can withstand a violent storm." The Duke knew that due to the conflicts and misunderstandings, his relationship with his brother wouldn't improve in the short term. But he asked to give Luke at least one chance. Now, Claudia was sitting in the office waiting for him. The heroine saw in the game illustrations the happy moments that occurred before Nerra's arrival. But these images were from the original story Claudia's past, which the girl didn't know about. Luke awkwardly entered the room, thanking his sister for agreeing to come. He wanted to see her before leaving, so he invited Claudia to talk. Suddenly, the girl asked her brother if he remembered their childhood. She said it was so long ago that she herself didn't remember, so she wondered what it was like. Hearing this unexpected question, Luke rubbed the back of his head. According to him, their relationship was more respectful than that of ordinary siblings. Since childhood, Claudia had been in poor health, so he always took care of her, and she was also very good to him. Tears fell on the heroine's hands gripping her skirt as she asked why her brother was so cruel to her. In that case, she wondered why he avoided communication and was even unwilling to be in the same room with her. Looking at her brother, Claudia asked why Luke only paid attention to Nerra. The boy knelt in front of his sister, lowering his head and asking for her forgiveness. It might sound like an excuse, but he was foolish and truly believed Nerra was right. Claudia placed one of the pendants in front of Luke, saying it was a memento left by their mother. The girl didn't forgive her brother, but if he wanted to go with her, she wouldn't stop him, as it was their mother's wish. Luke read the inscription on the pendant, holding it close to his chest. When Nathan woke up, he felt as if he had seen Claudia in a dream. Noticing a letter on the chair, he read it and thought about how foolish he had been. The prince resolutely left the room, surprising the knight standing at the door. Suddenly, he heard a voice calling those who stole his treasure villains. The voice demanded its return, and an explosion sounded in the room. The emperor rushed in upon hearing the noise, asking his son if he was all right. He looked at the messy room. According to the emperor, the trouble must have come from the SBR side, which he hadn't expected. Nathan said he was fine and asked where Claudia was. According to his majesty, the girl would no longer be a princess. While Nathan was suffering from illness, Regis went to the front lines and got into trouble. Upon learning this, Claudia immediately left the palace. Perhaps the girl hoped to gain merit with the help of the elves' power, but the emperor wouldn't forgive her for daring to disobey him. Therefore, now no matter what Nathan said, Claudia couldn't be a princess. Suddenly, the prince demanded that the army be prepared, intending to depart immediately. With a malicious glint in his eyes, he turned back and told his father that, as an older brother, he had a duty to help Regis. Claudia watched Luke from the room's window, wondering if giving him a chance was the right thing to do. Elliot suddenly appeared beside her, asking what she was thinking. The elf guessed the girl was nervous about tomorrow's journey and tried to reassure her. Claudia worried whether the fire spirit would obey her. Elliot thought it was a good question, as he inherently disliked humans, and they hadn't even made a formal contract yet. The fire spirit once found pleasure in communicating with humans, but at some point, people began to fear him, and he, in turn, began to hate them. However, Elliot didn't know exactly why, as he had never been interested in it. He advised Claudia to be careful if she was going to ask the fire spirit this question herself. The closer one got to its territory, the more likely it was to encounter it unexpectedly. A while later, Claudia's carriage, escorted by soldiers, left the estate. Claudia was pleased with the power she had gained, as even those who had previously disregarded her noble status now remained silent. Even those who hadn't ignored her but spread rumors immediately shut their mouths after she displayed her power. After the soldiers set up camp, they marveled at the ability to access fresh water without restriction. The knights were delighted to be able to wash, while the other soldiers couldn't even imagine such a luxury. They thanked Claudia for filling their buckets with clean water, and Luke, seeing this, felt proud of his sister. Claudia noticed the soldiers sitting dejectedly around the damp firewood, unable to light a fire. She remembered they would soon encounter the fire spirit, and a sudden thought crossed her mind. She looked up at the sky and asked if the spirit was nearby. The soldiers watched in astonishment as the fire spirit descended from the sky and appeared before Claudia, asking if she had summoned him. Luke and the soldiers stared in surprise. Realizing it was the fire spirit, known for killing indiscriminately, they scattered in fear. Claudia told everyone to calm down, as she had already made an agreement with the spirit. The spirit asked her why she had summoned him. Claudia needed to start a fire, but the wood was too damp to burn. She smiled and asked the spirit to help her with this problem. Hearing this, the fire spirit was enraged, furious that she had disturbed him for such a trivial matter. Luke, worried that his sister would be burned, rushed to help her, but the soldiers held him back, saying it was too dangerous. Claudia had anticipated this reaction from the spirit, but they had much to do, and if she missed this opportunity, he would become even more uncooperative. She looked at him with a confident gaze and asked if he truly intended to refuse a request from his contractor. The fire spirit stared at Claudia in silence for a moment, considering her words, then sneered and said he hadn't refused her, as they were partners after all. He lit the fire. Claudia pondered what to do, as she needed to find a way to make a formal contract with the spirit as soon as possible. She remembered Elliot telling her that people used to fear the fire spirit, and in response, he rejected them. She was worried about this conversation, as figuring out why the spirit started hating humans might be the key. Luke came to the carriage window and said they needed to cross the river to Cade County to regroup their forces, but there was no bridge. Claudia smiled and told her brother to leave this task to her. Upon reaching the riverbank, Claudia summoned Elliot's power to begin solving the problem. Claudia raised her hand and used her power to part the river waters. Maintaining this state, she ordered the soldiers to quickly cross the passage. That evening, after setting up camp, the soldiers discussed Miss Rebello's impressive abilities. One was already anticipating victory, while another thought it was too early to relax. Lying in her tent on the bed, Claudia ached all over, having overused her mental powers in recent days. She needed to take care of herself now, so she hoped nothing serious would happen soon. Suddenly, she heard the anxious voices of the soldiers outside. Claudia stepped out of her tent to see why the knights needed water. The soldiers pleaded with Claudia for help, as one of the tents had caught fire. Claudia, not understanding why this was happening now, immediately rushed to the scene. She summoned Elliot's power. According to the water spirit, if she continued using her powers, she wouldn't be able to hold on, but Claudia couldn't stand idly by. She had to at least try. When Claudia woke up in bed, she asked Luke, who was sitting beside her, what had happened. According to her brother, everything had been taken care of as she had extinguished the fire. Luke had been terrified, paralyzed with fear as soon as the fire started. After confirming that everything had returned to normal, Claudia sent her brother out of the tent. After he left, Claudia found Luke's feigned concern sickening. Suddenly, Elliot appeared beside her, saying it was surprising, since Claudia knew that the spirit's power required the contractor's energy, and yesterday, she was clearly unable to use her powers. Given her condition, Claudia now found it strange as well, because at this moment, she even felt a surge of energy. Suddenly, the fire spirit joined them, curious about what they were discussing so intensely. When he guessed it was about yesterday's fire, Claudia asked if he had seen the whole thing. According to the fire spirit, some lunatic had started the fire. There couldn't be a good outcome. Claudia wondered why he did nothing, knowing the consequences. The fire spirit said he didn't see the need to do anything, as they didn't even have a formal contract. In Claudia's view, he was only thinking of himself, which was contradictory, since he, who should have been the most passionate, was colder than anyone else. The fire spirit called humans shameless creatures. He felt meaningless sympathy for those who didn't know gratitude. So Claudia believed there was no contract between them. After the fire spirit left, Elliot noticed Claudia hastily reasoning. After all, the fire that broke out yesterday spread to the mountain, and it was the fire spirit who stopped it. Elliot didn't understand him very well either. But it was true. In his opinion, the fire spirit's personality was indeed very complex. The spirit, lying in the middle of the field, believed he was accompanying them, simply out of boredom. Standing in front of Claudia, Elliot rejected her proposal. According to him, he had no reason to talk to the fire spirit. After all, he strictly forbade him from coming to him. However, Claudia asked Elliot to do her a favor. The girl arrived at a field where the fire spirit was lying in the middle of the grass, looking at the sky. Seeing the girl, he jumped up and asked her why she had come to him again. He was angry that Elliot had told the girl where he was. But according to Claudia, the water spirit wasn't present, and she asked him not to follow her. The girl came to apologize because she learned that he had participated in extinguishing the fire. The fire spirit laughed because this apology was clearly related to the contract Claudia desperately needed. He decided to give the girl another chance, but she had to show him the sincerity of her apology. If he was satisfied, he would forgive her. Otherwise, he would make Claudia the most unfortunate person in the world. The girl admitted that her previous remarks were inconsiderate and apologized for them, although she felt that words alone were not enough. Suddenly, the girl asked if she could become the sacrifice the fire spirit required for the contract. The fire spirit was so enraged that flames erupted around him, and he yelled that this was not the time for strange jokes. He asked Claudia if she understood what it meant to be a sacrifice, if she really thought a simple conversation could appease his anger. Claiming to have seen her sincerity, the fire spirit was about to turn the girl to ashes. Despite the threat of being burned to ashes, Claudia slowly walked towards the spirit. When the girl stood before him, the spirit asked if she was serious. When asked if Claudia really wanted to die, the girl replied that everything was fine. According to her, although it was hot, it was okay. When she touched the spirit, she felt warmth. However, when the girl guessed that he didn't actually hate humans, the fire spirit pushed her hand away. Claudia admitted that, with Elliot's help, she had seen his past, where someone important to the fire spirit died before his eyes. Helena's last order to him, as a contracted soldier, was not to extinguish the fire. The fire spirit pleaded with the girl to stop, as her life was in danger. He didn't understand why Helena would go so far as to try to set herself on fire. However, because of this ability, the girl's entire family had been burned, and she no longer saw any meaning in living. If Helena hadn't made a contract with him, perhaps the story would have had a different ending. Holding his head, the fire spirit begged for the order to be rescinded, to be allowed to extinguish the flames. Now he asked Claudia what had changed after learning about his past. He was enraged that the girl chose to sympathize with him, pouring the heat of the flames onto her. However, Claudia grabbed his hand, claiming that wasn't the case, and apologized for judging him without knowing the whole story. Even though the girl knew his past, she couldn't change anything, but she still thought the fire spirit had been through a very difficult time. She just wanted to say it wasn't his fault. Now she released the spirit's hand and asked him again not to blame himself. Claudia collapsed to the ground, exhausted. The fire spirit called out to the girl, trying to revive her, but she remained motionless. He picked up Claudia, carried her to the tent, and summoned Elliot. After handing the girl over to him, the fire spirit blamed the water spirit for causing all of this, as it was he who told her about his past. However, according to Elliot, he didn't see any problem, as Claudia looked healthy. After putting her on the bed, he asked the fire spirit if he had burned everything down because he couldn't stop thinking about his previous contractor. He was surprised by the girl's resilience, as her skin should have melted at his touch. Elliot wondered why he had come here, after all he had done. Meanwhile, the girl herself was dreaming of hamburgers and Coca-Cola. According to Elliot, he made a contract with the girl because he became interested in her. After all, Claudia said she was from another world, and he had initially chosen her as his master. According to the girl, she came to this world to become a contractor for spirits. This all sounded like nonsense to the fire spirit, but to prove his point, Elliot pointed out that Claudia was unharmed, even though her body should have been burned. According to him, the girl was different from ordinary people. Everything about her was special, including her abilities, thoughts, and attitude towards others. Of course, she was also different different from the previous contractor who had left the fire spirit with wounds that wouldn't heal. The protagonist woke up in the morning, clutching her head because it was too noisy in the tent. Opening her eyes, she saw the spirits arguing again and realized that she had fainted again yesterday and slept through the entire day. Suddenly, the fire spirit approached Claudia and offered her a contract. She gave him the new name Trid. After the protagonist recognized him, she kept thinking about how to apologize. The girl decided to take a chance. Based on Elliot's story, everything went well, and now she had become the official master of two spirits. Claudia laughed as she watched Elliot and Trid argue about whose element was stronger. Eventually, the group arrived at Count Cade's territory for a short rest. The Count warmly welcomed his guests, intending to help them as much as he could, as he had no sons and wasn't in the best of health himself and couldn't be of much other help. Claudia, smiling, first requested a room. The protagonist was in a good mood because she finally had a bath and changed her clothes, something she hadn't done in a long time. When the girl left the room, Luke asked to speak with her. The young man introduced the Count's daughter to his sister and told her that from now on, the young lady would be accompanying their army. Madeline of House Cade bowed to Claudia and asked to be called Maddie. The protagonist didn't understand why Luke would bring such a young girl along, but her brother insisted that she was already 19 years old. Claudia laughed at him, as this claim was simply unbelievable. When the protagonist asked Miss Cade if she was really 19 and if she had her parents' permission, the girl answered affirmatively. However, since Claudia didn't believe her, she threatened to ask Maddie's parents. The frightened girl chased after her, begging her to stop. The protagonist agreed not to approach her parents on the condition that the girl honestly confessed her age. Blushing and frowning, Maddie admitted that she was actually only 13, but she believed she was old enough to make her own decisions without her parents' permission. She could use healing magic, so she wouldn't be a burden on the march. But Claudia couldn't take a minor to a place where she could die. Luke agreed with his sister's point of view. She was about to leave, but Maddie stopped her. Noticing the jewelry in the girl's hair, she asked where the hairpin came from. The jewelry was given to the protagonist by the Countess, but Maddie claimed it was hers and couldn't be taken without permission. The girl said that if Claudia allowed her to come along, she would pretend this incident never happened. The protagonist was amused by the girl's threats and conditions. Although she didn't want to, she had to talk to Maddie's parents. The Count and Countess apologized to Claudia for their daughter's behavior. Fortunately, the matter was quickly resolved. She was supposed to have a good rest at the Count's estate, but due to the rush, she didn't get to rest properly. The girl hoped to get some sleep on the road and was about to lie down, but when she touched the blanket, she noticed something moving underneath. She screamed in fright and, throwing back the blanket, found Maddie hiding underneath, begging her to calm down. Luke couldn't understand how the girl had snuck into the carriage, as even a child should understand what they were doing. Maddie pleaded to be taken along, as she had specifically learned healing skills for this purpose and would be useful in the war. The girl collapsed on the floor, sobbing hysterically and kicking her legs. Claudia realized that she needed to send guards to take Maddie back, but they didn't have enough manpower or the time to do so. Therefore, the protagonist decided to take the girl along, and she would need to learn to be responsible for her actions. After settling Maddie in the carriage, Claudia and Luke rode alongside each other on horseback. The girl complained about having to stay in the carriage all the time, as she was also a noble and knew how to ride a horse. The protagonist asked Maddie to at least be quiet, as they had already been forced to take her along. Just then, an enemy arrow flew past Claudia. Luke ordered everyone to prepare, as the enemy was only 100 meters away. Claudia opened the carriage door and ordered it terrified, screaming Maddie to stay inside until she returned. She sternly instructed Maddie not to come out until she was told it was safe. Claudia rushed forward, and Maddie leaned out, calling after her, insisting she could help. Suddenly, the carriage shook, and Maddie lost her balance, falling to the floor. An arrow immediately flew past. Maddie fearfully watched the soldiers falling on the battlefield and closed her eyes in terror. Blood splattered everywhere, even landing on Maddie's face. Nerra arrived at the place of her further studies. At the Royal Elven Academy, the female guide who received her asked if she liked it there, as she looked pleased. Nerra said it was indeed beautiful and praised the designer for truly doing their best. She complimented the girls' good taste, as their academy was known for its magnificent landscapes, all built by Lord Leonard himself, who had constructed beautiful buildings all over the world. For some reason, Nerra saw mockery in the woman's gaze and couldn't shake the feeling that she was being treated like a country bumpkin. She was furious that a mere guide dared to look at the future empress this way. Suddenly, she ordered the woman to shut up and just lead the way. The embarrassed guide apologized to Nerra, and at that moment, Nerra heard whispers behind her. Approaching the girls, she asked if they had something to say to her, as they had been staring. One of the girls apologized for embarrassing Nerra and admitted she had heard about the second prince's proposal. Nerra responded that they should improve their conversational skills, as Regis was the only heir recognized by the emperor, so he wasn't just a prince, but the crown prince. The girl asked in surprise if Nerra had heard the latest news. Recently, the emperor had declared that the two princes who contributed the most in the war would become heirs to the throne. Furthermore, Miss Claudia had personally gone to the front lines, and such courage was impressive. Just like that, Nerra learned that her sister had gone to the front, where something had happened that made the situation very complicated. So Claudia went there to save him with the power of the elves. Nerra held her head, furious that Regis hadn't told her anything. The girl needed to take action urgently. The next day, the teacher reported to the dean of the Elven Academy that Nerra had suddenly fallen ill and refused local treatment, returning to her hometown. When the dean asked about her impression of the future empress, the lady replied that she had a bad feeling. She recounted how she had concealed her identity and toured the girl around the academy as a guide. Nerra quickly revealed her true colors, so it was necessary to continue monitoring her closely. This academy was not just an educational center. The behavior of the highest noble's children was carefully monitored here and reported to the royal family. Nerra opened the door and called for Jared, telling him she was back. Her brother came down from the second floor, remarking that such a distinguished guest had come to such a humble place. Nerra hadn't seen Jared in a long time. This was her first time home since she went to the Duke's house in place of Lilia. He was angry that his sister hadn't shown up for so long. During this time, Nerra hadn't been present when Lilia died, nor when their parents, unable to bear the grief, passed away one after the other. The girl apologized to Jared, saying she was afraid he would hate her for what she had done, but he told her not to joke. After all, Nerra herself had said that her family was hindering her life and threatened to do terrible things if he tried to contact her. Jared didn't understand how she dared to make excuses after demanding they disappear from her life. Nerra couldn't bear these accusations, screaming that she just wanted to escape this place. Although she had always yielded to Lilia because of her illness, she couldn't let her take her place. Jared drove his sister away, ordering her not to return, because if Lilia had been in the Duke's care, she could have received treatment and survived. Nerra admitted to betraying her sister for her own dreams, but she said she had also suffered a lot. She tearfully told her brother about how the vicious Claudia had bullied her. She said the girl had crossed all boundaries, but she had endured everything, taking it as her punishment. Nerra knelt before her brother, reminding him how much she wanted to be empress. This dream was the only pillar in her life, and she had to betray and leave her beloved sister to pursue it. Therefore, only when she ascended the throne could she apologize to Lilia for her betrayal. Nerra continued sobbing, prostrate at Jared's feet, begging for help. Her brother only needed to do a small thing as she instructed. It wasn't difficult. If Jared didn't help, then Nerra was finished. So she pleaded with him for this favor. After all, they were family. Soldiers happily reported to Claudia about their easily won victory, but Claudia wanted to know where Commander Luke was. According to the knights, he went with an elite unit to escort the second prince, and we'll be back soon. Walking towards the carriage, the heroine felt herself become stronger as her body felt lighter, and her skills might have also improved. Opening the carriage door, she invited Maddie to come out as the danger had passed. However, Claudia immediately discovered that the girl was nowhere to be found. Regis trembled with fear, unsure if this was the end. Looking at the fallen soldiers on the battlefield, he couldn't believe he would really die like this. Just then, Luke ran up to him, apologizing for being late. Regis hugged the young man tightly, asking if they had brought reinforcements, as there were too many enemies. However, Luke told the prince that their troops had already defeated all their opponents, and his sister had been a great help in this battle. On their way to the troops, Regis still couldn't believe it was Claudia's sister being spoken of, and not Nerra as he had initially thought. As soon as the troops reunited, the heroine rushed towards her brother in a fluster. Noticing Regis, she bowed to him, saying it was her honor to see him safe and sound. The prince reminded her not to be presumptuous, but she ignored his words, telling her brother about Maddie's disappearance. Regis watched them with a sneer as Claudia recounted the details of the disappearance. At this moment, His Highness and the commander were informed that letters had been received from the duchy and a spur. According to the soldiers, these villains had captured Miss Madeline. In the cell, Maddie confronted her kidnappers, ordering them to release her immediately and threatening them with her parents. The guard ordered her to be quiet or he would slit her throat. Maddie cowered on the floor, hugging her knees to her chest, silently weeping. The soldier reported to Duke Elias about the battle that had taken place, involving a sorceress who could control water and fire. According to him, she was so powerful that everyone was terrified, but the Duke couldn't understand how one sorceress could defeat them all. The soldier reported that they had captured a girl from a noble family as a hostage, to be used for negotiations later. An imperial citizen who volunteered to see the Duke was brought into the office. Jared knelt, trembling, and handed a letter to Elias Spur. The letter stated that command of the enemy forces had been transferred from Prince Regis to the two children of Duke Rebellos, whose daughter was able to control spirits. This information had been kept secret, known only to the closest relatives. When the Duke asked who had sent the letter, Jared replied that it was written by Miss Nerra, the second prince's fiancé. Elias couldn't understand why the prince's future wife would reveal such confidential information to the enemy. The man replied that she wanted to eliminate the enemy on the battlefield. We are talking about her adopted older sister, Claudia. Nerra, as the Duke's adopted daughter, had always endured her abuse. Although Elias didn't know the details, he was impressed by how a girl could betray the family that took her in and turn against her country. He didn't want to get involved in the sisters' feud, but he found it amusing. Although they first needed to verify the authenticity of the letter, the Duke intended to capture Claudia and take her hostage, using her to confirm if it was true. Claudia instructed Elliot to scout the Spur side, and he reported suspicious activity on the coast. She told Luke that something was constantly being loaded onto a ship from the capital, which was suspicious, so everything needed to be checked. Her brother thought it was too dangerous, as the coast was enemy territory, but if they sent a small unit, it should be fine. Claudia could leave this matter to Luke, but she was worried about being here by herself while he was gone. Regis walked into their tent, furious that they had organized a meeting without his consent. Even though they had been given some authority, His Highness ordered that everything be reported to him in advance from now on. In her tent, Claudia was furious with the ungrateful Regis, whom she had risked her life to save. Suddenly, the prince's voice came from outside, asking her to come out. According to him, an emergency meeting had just unanimously passed a decision. Regis demanded that the girl sacrifice her ring for the Empire, but Claudia didn't understand why she should do so. The prince intended to suddenly attack the enemy with the power of the spirits, so he ordered her to remove the ring immediately. The heroine looked at Regis in confusion as he decided to take all the credit from her at once. She apologized to the onlookers, explaining that she didn't have the right to dispose of the ring. To wield its power, one had to be chosen by the spirits, and they had already recognized her as the sole bearer. When Claudia refused, Regis ordered her arrest for disobeying the commander's orders. The soldiers, hesitant to use force, pleaded with her to hand the ring over to the prince immediately. Claudia couldn't help but lament how the situation had escalated. Claudia removed the ring and offered it to Regis, who seemed pleased by her swift obedience. However, as she was about to place it in his palm, the ring began to glow. Upon touching it, the prince cried out in pain as his entire hand was engulfed in flames. Fearing he would lose his arm, he frantically demanded water. Moments later, a powerful stream of water cascaded down from above. The spirits, appearing before Regis, were enraged by his presumptuousness, as only Claudia could control them. According to the fire spirit, if the prince ever tried such a thing again, he would experience flames hotter than hell. Regis fled in terror, muttering that Claudia shouldn't rely so heavily on such power. Claudia was tired of the narcissistic prince, If Nathan were here, he wouldn't have acted this way. Walking towards her tent, she wondered where he was and if he was all right. Nathan was displeased that the troops had stopped again, as they had promised to reach their destination before nightfall. A knight explained that the schedule was subject to change depending on the weather and the soldier's condition. These excuses finally enraged the prince, who ordered the knight out of his sight. He fumed about the slow progress of the troops. If he were skilled with a sword, he would have cut them down, though he felt more confident now. Noticing the real Nathan's gaze in the reflection of his sword, he sneered, as he had awakened earlier than expected. The prince ordered him to leave his body, but he refused. Nathan, determined to expel him by force, slashed his own arm with his sword. The being possessing him, not understanding his actions, demanded he stop. Soldiers entering the tent, seeing their master covered in blood and sweat, anxiously inquired what had happened. His Highness asked where they were, learning that their forces had reached the border. When he asked about Claudia's whereabouts, the knight replied that she was at the front lines and they were heading in her direction. The prince, having no time to explain what had transpired, demanded his aide report all information regarding the current situation. The Duke had sent an envoy proposing a trade to Claudia. Claudia found the idea of exchanging the Duke's daughter for Countess Maddie absurd. According to the envoy, Elias stated he would respect Claudia's decision if she agreed to the trade. The entire situation seemed ludicrous to Claudia, who suspected it might be a trap. However, agreeing to the exchange would grant her easy access to the duchy. Elias, unaware of Claudia's magic, would be less cautious, giving her an opportunity to gather intelligence. Their primary objective was to find the key to ending the war and negotiating a truce. But if that proved impossible, they would simply acquire the necessary intelligence for the war in return. Luke's absence gave Regis more opportunities to bully her, which, ironically, was advantageous for Claudia. Claudia asked the envoy to inform the Duke that she was willing to sacrifice herself for the well-being of the Cade family. As she prepared to leave, the prince remarked that it was her choice and not to say he hadn't warned her. Claudia had decided to walk into the lion's den herself. Though it was difficult not to be afraid, she trusted in her abilities. If she remained cautious and made no mistakes, everything would be all right. Elias observed the girl. She had made an enemy of his sister, and her father was the very Duke who had killed his own. He wondered how much Claudia resembled that demon. Elias ordered the hostage exchange to commence immediately. As the enemy began to move, Claudia rode towards Maddie, who was being brought to them. Maddie sobbed loudly, begging Claudia for forgiveness. According to her, she had only wanted to help those suffering from the war on Imperial lands. After watching Maddie's silence for a moment, Claudia asked her to listen. She explained that when you want to help others, you need to understand what you can and cannot do. For example, Claudia herself was too weak to wield a sword, but fortunately, she could control the spirits. If she couldn't, she would have found another way. So Maddie needed to start with what she could do now. She needed to study hard and gain experience. When Maddie was ready, it wouldn't be too late to act again. Claudia bid farewell to Maddie and rode towards the enemy. Maddie breathed a sigh of relief, confirming that Maddie was safe, though she felt as if she had aged 100 years. When Claudia reached Elias' spur, he ordered her to dismount and stand before him. Claudia obeyed, and the Duke commanded her to raise her head. Elias stared at the girl in surprise, astonished by her identity. Regis felt a sense of relief, as if he had finally been cured of some illness. The second prince's only regret was not obtaining the elf ring. Suddenly, a knight came running, shouting that something had happened. The soldier couldn't speak coherently, only pointing to a figure approaching them. Nathan arrived, furious to find his supposedly endangered brother safe and sound, but his wife nowhere in sight. Initially startled, Regis decided to compose himself and speak as they had agreed. He took responsibility, claiming the Countess had been captured by the enemy and that the Duke had offered to exchange Claudia for her. According to Regis, he had tried to stop Claudia, but she wouldn't listen. Upon learning that Claudia was being held by the Duke, Nathan silently regarded his brother for a moment. Then, Nathan lashed out at Regis, punching him with all his might, ordering everyone to prepare to march north. Nathan turned and left his brother lying on the ground. Regis couldn't understand how such a decision could be made so quickly. Nathan said she had to be brought back, but his brother wasn't sure if he meant Claudia. Regis didn't know how they were were supposed to rescue a girl from behind enemy lines. Nathan reminded him they had a contingency plan for this situation. Regis broke out in a cold sweat, unsure if his brother meant the plan he was thinking of. In response, the prince only confirmed his suspicions.